you've been here the whole time, but you didn't say anything and didn't do anything? Mu Qing said indifferently, I said I'll always be here. It's just that I didn't talk much and you guys didn't see me. However, there were several times when they were short of manpower, but they couldn't find him. Even when they called for him, he didn't come out, so everyone thought that General Xianzhen had gone missing. Xiao Yan was still hoping that Feng Xian would be in the crowd, but they didn't find him. After searching around, Feng Xian really wasn't there. He could only say, all right. Are you coming with us to help? That's great, there's finally someone we can use. Thus, Mu Qing walked up. Seeing him follow, the Imperial Preceptor and Hua Cheng's expressions were the same. Both of them had not been very fond of Mu Qing since a long time ago. Not to mention Hua Cheng, the Grand Tutor had not wanted to take Mu Qing as a disciple from the start. From the looks of it, it was obvious that rather than having a helper like Mu Qing, it was better to have no helper at all. Mu Qing wouldn't be unaware of their attitude, but after he went over, he still bowed to the Imperial Preceptor and said in a low voice, Master. The Imperial Preceptor nodded and didn't say anything. After all, Mu Qing didn't do anything that was unacceptable. Since he wanted to help, there was no reason for him to go back. He said to Shi Qingxian, the Crown Prince's statue is here, the vengeful spirits will still need a few days to purify. There are a few groups of people now, you should take a good look. Shi Qingxian also nodded, of course. But wait a minute, Senior, I've asked you a few times, can you answer me, who exactly are you? The Imperial Preceptor didn't answer. The few of them followed Hua Cheng to a large house at the side. Hua Cheng leisurely tossed a die and was about to open the door. Who knew, with a casual glance, his expression suddenly changed slightly. Xiao Yan keenly sensed it and said, What's wrong, San Lang, can't you use 1,000 miles shrink? Hua Cheng regained his senses, smiled slightly and said, No. It's just that I rarely throw out such a result. He opened his palm towards Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan moved closer to take a look and was also stunned. On the pale palm, there was only a lone die, and it was impressively a 1 point. When Hua Cheng made a move, it would always be 6 big red points. A 1-point number was really extremely rare. Xiao Yan's heart faintly trembled and said, What does this point mean? Did I accidentally miss? Hua Cheng said, According to past experience, it probably means that there is an extremely dangerous thing waiting for me ahead. Xiao Yan's heart sank a little. The Imperial Preceptor said from behind, Sigh, how many times have I told you young people, gambling is not good, quit as soon as possible. Your Highness, look at what kind of bad habits he has picked up. It's too fake. Hua Cheng immediately stopped smiling. Oh. Without another word, he brought the Imperial Preceptor and moved to the other side of the river. His movements were strange and fast. Before the Imperial Preceptor could react, he was already standing beside Mu Qing. He was completely stunned. The empty shells that were stepped on by Hua Cheng's boots didn't even realize that they had been stepped on. When they looked up and saw nothing, they scratched their heads in confusion and continued to swim in the lava. The Imperial Preceptor finally came back to his senses. He glanced at Hua Cheng and evaluated, his skills are not bad. On the other side, Xiao Yan thought, too strict. How can this kind of skill be called, not bad? Shaking his head, he said, I'm going over too. Hua Cheng turned around and said, Brother, you stay over there first. I'll come over to pick you up. However, Xiao Yan's actions were faster than his words. He had long since moved. Leaping up, he tapped on the stomach of an empty shell monster that was facing the sky. He felt the hard body under his feet sink slightly, but he had already leaped up again and tapped on the head of another empty shell monster in front of him. Just like that, after stepping on 5 or 6 monsters, he arrived at the center of the lava flow. Unexpectedly, just as Xiao Yan was about to soar into the air again, his body suddenly sank and he almost lost his balance. Relying on his incomparably quick reaction, he steadied himself and looked down. The monster under his feet had actually reached out and grabbed his boots. Xiao Yan thought to himself, oh no, it's coming again. His terrible luck had come again. The few people in front of him were all safe and sound when they crossed the river, but the moment he crossed, he encountered a monster that wasn't easy to deal with. That monster grabbed his right ankle and didn't let him get up. That empty shell monster was only able to float on the surface of the lava because it was hollow, but it still couldn't bear much weight. Scorching air rose up, steaming Xiao Yan until his entire body was covered in sweat. A corner of his sleeve had actually caught on fire. If he stayed any longer, he was afraid that he would either sink into the lava together with the stone he was stepping on, or his entire body would burn up. At this critical moment, Xiao Yan was quick-witted. Ruoxia flew out and pulled over the other empty shell monster that was 30 feet in front of him. His left foot stepped on that monster's back. In this way, the two stone shells shared his weight, increasing his buoyancy. For a while, he wouldn't be able to sink. Only then did Xiao Yan pull out his maiden heart and cut off the arm that was grabbing his boots. Just as he was about to leap out again, a red shadow flashed to his side. Xiao Yan said, San Lang. I'm already fine, you don't need to come over. From afar, Hua Cheng exploded the empty shell monster that was grabbing Xiao Yan and said, let's go ashore first. The two of them went ashore together. Xiao Yan extinguished the fire on his sleeve and said, I'm sorry, I made you worry. Hua Cheng said, it's my fault. I should have told you to wait for me to pick you up before going over. The state preceptor said, all right, stop. His Highness isn't that delicate. Even if you don't go over, he can still handle it. What's there to pick? Let's go. This way. The few of them went ashore and walked for a while before arriving in front of the Wuyong Imperial Palace. Half of the Imperial Palace was buried in the ground. After the few of them entered, the road was sloping, leading all the way to the depths of the underground. After leaving the ground, the scorching hot air gradually cooled down. The entire underground palace was empty. The slightest sound would produce a buzzing echo. The few of them ignited the flames in their palms, illuminating the surroundings. Although this imperial palace had been sealed for a long time, it could still be considered magnificent. The light from the flames reflected many dazzling golden patterns, richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. However, there wasn't a single person in sight. The atmosphere was lifeless, like a huge ancient tomb. The state preceptor said, this is the place where His Highness the Crown Prince grew up. Mu Qing said, is he really here? The state preceptor said, what do you think? This is the place where his powers are the strongest. Everyone, be careful. At this time, Xiao Yan suddenly discovered something. At Hua Cheng's waist, the silver eyeball on the hilt of the misfortune blade was madly spinning, abnormally anxious. However, Hua Cheng's expression was cold, completely ignoring it. Xiao Yan couldn't help but reach out to touch it. Only then did the misfortune blade slightly calm down. Hua Cheng slightly lowered his head and saw that Xiao Yan's hand was still on the hilt of the blade. He faintly smiled and was about to open his mouth. At this moment, a giggle came from the corner of the main hall. It was the voice of a middle-aged man. Crafty and cunning, as if harboring bad intentions. When Xiao Yan heard it, the hairs on his back immediately stood up. Moreover, he had heard this voice before. It was the voice of the fetus. Mu Qing shouted, over there. A flame shot out, illuminating the area above them. At the corner of the high ceiling of the palace, there was a glistening white thing stuck to it like a gecko. It was the fetus. Its long bright red tongue licked his back as if it was tickling him. Seeing the flame fly over, it mischievously laughed and vomited something that looked like vomit at Mu Qing. Mu Qing dodged it with a disgusted expression. The state preceptor looked at the sticky thing on the ground, then looked at the fetus on top. He found it hard to accept and said, is this really that brat Feng Xian's son? Xiao Yan hurriedly said, wait. Wrong, wrong. You called him wrong, right? When the fetus heard its name, it paused for a moment and turned around to look at him. Xiao Yan said, wrong, wrong. We came to find your father. Do you know where he is? When the fetus heard, your father, it sneered and used all 4 of its legs to crawl away. Xiao Yan said, wrong, wrong. Quickly find it. Everyone burned the flame even higher and searched all around. Suddenly, Mu Qing said, this way. Xiao Yan asked, which way? Mu Qing pointed at a path and said, I just saw it enter this place. The path he pointed at led to the side of a palace. It was a long and gloomy corridor. Even if they didn't know where the end was, they knew it definitely wouldn't lead to a good place. Hua Qing suddenly said, you really saw it enter this place? Mu Qing probably felt that he was being targeted and said with a bit of disgust, what benefit would I get from lying to you guys? Hua Qing let out a ha. Although he didn't carry any emotion, he wasn't too friendly either. The state preceptor said, what are you arguing about at this time? If you see any suspicious places, don't let them go. It's fine if you go in and take a look. That long corridor was extremely narrow. Originally, it was definitely wider, but it seemed to have been squeezed. Now, only one person could pass through. Mu Qing was probably the first to enter, probably because he was angry at the suspicion in Hua Cheng's words. Naturally, Hua Cheng walked in front of Xiao Yan to open the path. However, Xiao Yan discovered that the eyeball of misfortune on his waist had begun to spin wildly. His heart stirred and he immediately pulled Hua Cheng behind him. Hua Cheng asked, what's wrong? Xiao Yan coughed lightly and said, I said I would protect you, stand behind me. In a flash, Hua Cheng laughed softly. The 4 of them entered the long corridor. The deeper they walked, the more uncomfortable Xiao Yan felt. When it came to dangerous things, his intuition was extremely accurate. The thing that made him uncomfortable came from the front. Xiao Yan said, State Preceptor, do you remember where this path leads to? Why is it that the more I walk, the more I feel that there's something very heavy? Murderous aura. Moreover, it wasn't a living murderous aura, but an icy cold murderous aura. The deeper they went, the more tense his mind became. However, the state preceptor didn't answer him. Xiao Yan's heart thumped and he raised his voice to ask, State Preceptor. There was still no answer. Xiao Yan suddenly turned his head to look. He didn't know when, but there was actually no one behind him anymore. Several balls of flames flew around randomly, illuminating the entire room. Only then did Xiao Yan clearly see that the walls and shelves in all directions were densely packed with all kinds of swords, spears, swords, halberds, and other weapons. The air was dense and cold. As it turned out, this place was an armory. No wonder there was an icy cold murderous aura all around them. Xiao Yan himself had once had an armory like this. He was extremely fond of it and would often linger inside, forgetting to leave. However, this armory made him feel extremely uncomfortable, so he didn't want to stay any longer. But for the time being, he didn't know which of these 2 people he should believe. He also didn't know which one he should help. To tell the truth, both of them were extremely suspicious. In the end, Xiao Yan could only say, Rua Xie. I'll first tie them up and talk later. Rua Xie, who had been waiting for a long time, finally had a chance to show off. Unexpectedly, before the white silk even came out, Xiao Yan suddenly felt another wave of coldness spreading from behind him. He immediately changed the direction of his attack. Grabbing Rua Xie, he swung it backwards. As soon as he felt the white silk wrap around something, Xiao Yan grabbed Rua Xie and fiercely pulled, but he couldn't move it. His heart sank, and in the next moment, he was instead pulled by Rua Xie from the other end. His back firmly crashed into someone's embrace, and there was also an icy cold hard thing that pinched his waist. Xiao Yan. Although his body didn't look very sturdy, his strength was still very astonishing. Unless the other party was a colossus, how could they have pulled him over so easily? Xiao Yan was just about to backhand and punch when he felt a hand wrap around his waist. A voice from above said, "Gidge, it's me." Xiao Yan said, "San Lang." Sure enough, when he looked down, he saw that the hand that was wrapping around his waist was wearing a silver wristband carved with maple leaves, butterflies, and fierce beasts. When he turned his head again, he saw that the person who caught him was a tall and slender person dressed in red. The person was calm and composed, and a silver scimitar hung from his waist. That thing that had pinched his waist just now was most likely the hilt of this scimitar. Flower City. Xiao Yan immediately understood. It turned out that just now, it was Ruo Xie who had taken the initiative to drag him over to Flower City. He was basically fighting 1 against 2, so of course he was instantly pulled over. He steadied himself and silently picked up Ruo Xie. He said to it, "You're too much of a traitor." At this moment, Ruo Xie knew that it was pretending to be dead, so it didn't move an inch. Xiao Yan also didn't want to talk about it, so he tossed it aside and said, "San Lang, what happened just now? Weren't you always behind me? Where's Shifu?" Hua Qing said, "This place is very strange." Using his hand to support his forehead, he said, "That's it. To be honest, I don't know who's more suspicious." However, Hua Qing said, "Do you still need to ask?" "Of course, he's more suspicious." The direction he was pointing at was Mu Qing. Mu Qing unhappily said, "Even if you guys are making slanderous accusations, you should have a bottom line, right? Don't push the blame onto me every time something happens." Hua Qing said, "All right. Then, let me ask you a question. What's that thing on your wrist?" Hearing this, Mu Qing's expression immediately changed. He quickly retreated, but Feng Xian's eyes and hands were fast. Grabbing onto him, he asked, "Wrist?" On his wrist, there was a cursed shackle. Mu Qing pushed Feng Xian's hand away. The veins on his forehead bulged as he glared at him. When Xiao Yan saw that thing, he put down his crossed arms. Stunned, he asked, "Mu Qing, what's on your hand?" Mu Qing's expression sank and he didn't say anything. Hua Qing said, "I suggest you honestly answer the following questions. Why did Jun Wu summon you to the Divine Martial Palace? What did he say to you? Why did you receive better treatment than the other heavenly officials and could return unscathed? And why did you act out of character and take the initiative to come to Bronze Furnace Mountain to save someone? What's up with this thing on your hand? Why did you lure us here?" Seeing that the situation wasn't good, Mu Qing took a step back and immediately said, "Wait. Don't attack first. Listen to me first." Hua Qing spread his hands and said, "Please. Speak." Feng Xian said, "Tell me first, did you hit me?" After pausing for a moment, Mu Qing gritted his teeth and said, "Maybe it was me. But it's not what you think." Chapter 232. Mu Qing sucked in a deep breath. He admitted, "Indeed, Feng Xian was injured by me." Feng Xian was furious. "I knew it was definitely you." Mu Qing said to Xiao Yan, but that was because Immortal Capital was finished. At that time, all the heavenly officials were thinking of ways to escape, but he still stayed there and refused to leave. When I told him to leave, he wouldn't listen. If he stayed any longer, he would sooner or later be burned to death by the karmic flames. That's why I planned to knock him out and then throw him to you." Xiao Yan said, "But you didn't hand him to me." Feng Xian went missing. Yet he appeared here. Mu Qing said, "Because an accident happened along the way." "What accident?" Mu Qing said, "That was the fetus spirit. It suddenly attacked me from behind and bit me non-stop. It didn't let me bring him along. I didn't have time to pull him up. Immortal Capital began to disintegrate and reorganize, so Feng Xian followed the ground below him. He didn't know where he was moved. If what he said was true, then it meant that Mu Qing originally wanted to do a good deed. However, he accidentally poked a hole and tricked Feng Xian. It was very awkward. Xiao Yan said, then why didn't you say so earlier? Feng Xian also said, you really didn't want me to be burned to death in Immortal Capital? You just knocked me out and threw me there. Mu Qing's expression stiffened. He said to Xiao Yan, the fetus spirit was squatting on his chest. Later, that female ghost, Jian Lan, also came. I expected that she would wake Feng Xian up or move him away so that she wouldn't watch him burn to death. Xiao Yan also understood. He took the initiative to come out and save him probably because he had a guilty conscience. After all, he was the one who knocked Feng Xian out and lost him. Out of responsibility, he naturally had to do something. No wonder he was uneasy the whole way. He was probably also nervous about whether Feng Xian would die or not, however, this explanation was very hard to believe. Feng Xian grabbed his hair crazily. You really did this. Don't you know that I'm looking for someone? If you didn't knock him out, I might have found him. Mu Qing calmly said, that fetus spirit is Bai Wuxiang's subordinate. Bai Wuxiang won't harm them. And since they didn't want to go with you, you would just be wasting your time by staying there. Even if you shouted 1,000 times, it would be useless. You might as well leave the Immortal Capital first to save your life, and then look for them when you have the chance in the future. Did you have to rush to that kind of critical moment to come here and try to find them? I just made the best judgment under the circumstances. Feng Xian wasn't as calm as he was. Benefits my ass. You can only say such things when they're not your family members. Wait, so you're saying that you wanted to save me and let me leave? However, Hua Qing said, let's not talk nonsense. Answer my question. What did Jun Wu say to you? Mu Qing shut her mouth and hesitated for a moment. Hua Qing stared at him and asked, are you taking orders from him now? Mu Qing immediately said, there is absolutely no such thing. Hua Qing said, then please explain this curse. After arguing for so long, Mu Qing's mouth was a little dry. After a while, she said in a hoarse voice, if I tell you, you may not believe me. Feng Xian said, when I asked you just now, you denied it. Now that you admit it, of course it's hard to believe. Mu Qing said sullenly, why don't I admit it? If I told you what happened just now, you definitely wouldn't have believed me either. You would still have the same attitude. Who would admit it? Once you admit it, you won't be able to defend yourself. It's better not to admit it. Besides, although it was fortunate that Feng Xian was fine, this matter was still quite embarrassing. With his temperament, it was normal that he didn't want to admit it. Xiao Yan listened patiently and said, let him finish first. Mu Qing glanced at Xiao Yan. After a while, he said with difficulty, this is, because he wanted me to harm His Highness. I refused, so when he said this, even he felt awkward and couldn't continue. Hua Qing said, so, in a fit of anger, he put a curse on you. Mu Qing didn't say anything. Feng Xian said, nothing else. Hua Qing didn't have any special expression on his face. He said, honestly, do you believe what you said? Mu Qing seemed to have been greatly humiliated. She said coldly, it's up to you whether you believe it or not. There was a misunderstanding about me knocking out Feng Xian, but I didn't take orders from anyone. Feng Xian said, Mu Qing, you better tell the truth. Mu Qing saw his expression and her knuckles cracked. She said, what I said is the truth. What do you want to hear? I surrendered, so you want me to harm you, right? I am such a person in your heart, right? Crown Prince? He looked at Xiao Yan, his gaze agitated. Xiao Yan stared at him for a long time, thinking. He was about to speak when Hua Qing crossed his arms and blocked him. He met Mu Qing's gaze and said lightly, you don't have to look at His Highness like that. After all, you have a precedent. Mu Qing said, I didn't ask you. What precedent? Hua Qing smiled. What precedent? Did you succeed in your cultivation in the blessed land you snatched from His Highness? His smile was cold, and his tone was even more unkind. Mu Qing was stunned. Her face paled and she couldn't help but take 2 steps back. You. He knew that he wasn't very kind when he fought with Xiao Yan for the blessed land. Therefore, he was most afraid that people would dig it up and poke at it. Although Hua Cheng's tone was smiling, it was unconsciously aggressive. Mu Qing was shocked, but so was Xiao Yan. He was shocked because how did Hua Cheng know about this? Xiao Yan and Feng Xian weren't gossipy people. They never liked to talk behind people's backs or spread rumors. Although Mu Qing's departure at that time was a huge blow to them, they never complained to anyone. As for snatching the blessed land, Xiao Yan didn't want to mention it again. He didn't mention it to anyone, and he believed that Feng Xian was the same. Those 30 or so heavenly officials naturally wouldn't take the initiative to tell others whose blessed land they snatched. They would either keep their mouths shut about it or dress it up and distort it. Therefore, Xiao Yan didn't hear about this at all. Since that was the case, how did Hua Qing find out? Although he had planted many spies in the heavenly court, this matter was really too early. It was more than 800 years ago, and most of the people involved didn't mention it. How could such an old debt be found out? Mu Qing said, how did you know? Who told you? He looked at Feng Xian, then at Xiao Yan. In the end, he still looked at Xiao Yan. Hua Qing sneered, you don't have to look at His Highness. His Highness never told me these things. This is what you shouted at the top of the snowy mountain. Have you forgotten? Mu Qing's face turned even paler. Xiao Yan's doubts were slightly resolved, and he couldn't help but sweat slightly. Feng Xian and Mu Qing were always digging up each other's dirty accounts and exposing each other's past. They would definitely tie a pile of old debts to each other like gunpowder and throw it at each other. No wonder Hua Cheng was so angry at that time. However, he faintly felt that something wasn't so simple. Because Xiao Yan remembered something else, the red clothes burned the Wenwu temple. Hua Cheng became famous in one battle. He defeated 33 heavenly officials and burned all of their temples in the human world. Xiao Yan had long forgotten how many heavenly officials there were who fought over the blessed land with him. He couldn't even remember their names, appearances, and what they said. He only vaguely remembered that there were about 30 of them. Then, how many were there exactly? Could they be the 30-odd heavenly officials? If that was the case, didn't that mean that Flower City had known about this for a long time? After a while, Mu Qing reluctantly said, that time was that time, this time is this time. In short, I never thought. While they were arguing, Xiao Yan's leg suddenly flew out and he shouted, careful. Mu Qing was caught off guard and was kicked down. With 2 whooshing sounds, 2 cold lights brushed past his head and nailed him to the wall. Mu Qing jumped up and patted away the shoe prints on his chest. He said, did you do that on purpose? Did you make the first move? Xiao Yan hurriedly said, sorry, I really didn't do it on purpose. If it had been on purpose, Mu Qing would most likely have already smashed a human-shaped hole in the wall. Everyone turned their heads to look and saw 2 sharp swords nailed to the wall. The blades were still trembling. Feng Xian shouted, who? Xiao Yan said, no one. They moved on their own. Ding ding dang dang, clang clang clang. Murderous aura rose from all directions. Those weapons hanging on the wall became restless and trembled crazily, shaking the entire room until it was shaking. Xiao Yan said, quickly get out. Who knew that when he ran to the original exit, Feng Xian would say, why are you running there? There's no way out. Where's the door? This room shouldn't be without a door, right? How do we get out? Xiao Yan said, originally there was a door. But it's gone. What's wrong with these weapons? Why are they suddenly filled with murderous aura? Hua Cheng caught a long sword flying towards him between two fingers. He didn't use much strength, but that sword broke into 9 pieces and fell to the ground with a crackling sound. He said, "It's been too long since someone used it, so it's lonely. I felt someone come in and wanted to kill, that's all." The others subconsciously turned their heads to look at Mu Qing. Mu Qing immediately said, "It's not my fault." Hua Qing said, "But, you were the one who led us here." Mu Qing said, "I only pointed the way because I saw the fetal spirit." Hua Qing said, "Only you saw it." Mu Qing was speechless and clenched his fist. Feng Xian said, "What should we do now? Can't these weapons calm down?" Before Hua Cheng could answer, Xiao Yan suddenly remembered that he had dealt with similar demons and ghosts in the past. He muttered, "They can. But, they have to be allowed to kill." Feng Xian said, "But we can't get out of this place right now. Only the 4 of us are locked in here, so how can we kill? What can we kill?" Xiao Yan was about to speak when Hua Cheng suddenly said, 3. Feng Xian asked, "What 3? Hua Cheng said, "I'm just correcting you. There are only 3 people locked in here." Xiao Yan suddenly turned his head. Sure enough, in the armory, the 4th person, Mu Qing, had suddenly disappeared. It was absolutely true. The place where Mu Qing had been standing was now empty. Feng Xian was stunned. How can this be? He was standing here just now. Hua Cheng wasn't surprised. After all, he had already encountered this kind of thing before. He said, "This is by Wu Xiang's territory. Everyone listens to his orders and is unscrupulous. Naturally, he can take away whoever he wants." Previously, Feng Xian was 80% convinced and 20% doubtful. His tit-for-tat words towards Mu Qing were mostly out of anger. But now, he didn't know what to say. After a while, he said, "Your Highness, Mu Qing, he couldn't have really." Xiao Yan immediately said, "Let's not talk about this for now. These weapons are going to riot. Let's think of a way to calm them down first. Otherwise, we'll be chopped into minced meat." As he spoke, he pulled out Feng Xian from his back. However, Hua Qing suddenly pressed down on his hand. Xiao Yan was stunned. He raised his head and saw Hua Qing staring at him, one of his eyes faintly showing the color of blood. After a while, they finally caught up with Mu Qing in front. Feng Xian said, "Mu Qing, why are you running?" Mu Qing also stepped on a hollow person as a kickboard. He turned around and said, "If I don't run, am I going to wait for you guys to surround me?" Feng Xian had a bow but no arrows in his hands. He could only shout through the air, "Don't surround me. First, tell me clearly how you suddenly disappeared from the armory." Mu Qing turned around and sneered, "You guys." Before he finished speaking, Xiao Yan saw the scene in front of him clearly. His pupils shrank rapidly and he shouted, "In front of you." Mu Qing turned around and only then did he realize that the road in front of him had come to an abrupt end. This place should have originally been an underground fault. The drop was extremely large, at least 100 feet high, like a huge cliff. He didn't expect that this kind of terrain would suddenly appear. In addition, the further down they went, the faster the lava flowed. By the time he reacted, he was already caught off guard and flew out. Mu Qing's figure and the hollow person under his feet disappeared in an instant. And on this side, the 3 people were about to rush to the edge of that cliff at an unstoppable speed. At the moment of imminent peril, Ruoxi flew backwards. He wrapped a few strings around the corner of a distant palace and tied a knot. Xiao Yan grabbed Ruoxi with one hand and Hua Cheng with the other. He then threw the other end of Ruoxi to Feng Xian and said, "Catch." Using the silk as a knot, the 3 people were barely able to stabilize themselves. At this time, they were no more than 20 feet away from that cliff. If they were a step slower, they would have fallen down. It could be said that they had reined in the horse at the edge of the cliff. Only, the lava continued to surge down from above. Xiao Yan said again, "Withdraw." Ruoxi rapidly shortened and brought the three people into that palace. Not long after, the three people jumped onto the roof of the palace. This palace was relatively large, so the roof could be considered spacious. Using stone as a foundation, it didn't fear the erosion of the lava. Arriving here, they could temporarily relax. Slightly calming down, Feng Xian looked at that empty cliff and stared blankly for a while. He said in disbelief, "Mu Qing fell down." Xiao Yan barely managed to steady his wildly beating heart. Gasping for breath, he wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead and said, "No." Standing at the furthest corner of this palace's roof and sticking out their bodies, they could see that there was a long sword nailed into the rocks at the edge of the cliff. And a pair of hands were tightly gripping the hilt of this long sword. That pair of hands was a face that was trying its best to grit its teeth and was filled with blood. At this moment, Mu Qing was in a terrifying position parallel to the waterfall-like lava that was pouring down. Chapter 234. Xiao Yan was silent for a long time. The hilt of the long saber was burning red. Mu Qing let out a loud shout. He let go of one hand and hung for a while with the other. He didn't dare to hold on for too long and grabbed again. But his palms were already emitting white smoke. Although he was far away, he was still able to see the smoke. The others also seemed to have smelled the smell of burnt meat. Hua Cheng casually released a silver butterfly. The silver butterfly flapped its wings. After flying for a few dozen feet, it was not even a third of the distance to Mu Qing. He turned into a wisp of silver vapor. He vanished into thin air. Xiao Yan knew that he was showing off. The necromancer butterfly could not help either. A dead end was not worth risking one's life to try. Mu Qing also saw the process of the silver butterfly disappearing. His expression gradually became one of despair. He understood. Now, firstly, no one had the ability to save him. Secondly, no one believed him, especially when he had been struck by lightning in every possible way. Xiao Yan wouldn't risk his life to help him. However, although he was in despair, he was still unwilling to give up. Mu Qing gritted his teeth and shouted, "It doesn't matter if you don't believe me. I won't fall down just like that." As he spoke, he exerted more strength in his hands, as if he wanted to spin in the air and stand on the hilt. Unexpectedly, his body had just risen a few inches when he suddenly sank back down. Mu Qing looked down, and his eyes reflected the countless wraiths that had been melted into blood red. Their twisted faces and limbs were stuck to his legs and body, pulling him down. These vengeful spirits were originally dissolved in the flowing magma, but they suddenly emerged and hung on his lower body one after another. They were incomparably heavy and scalding hot, like adding oil to a fire and adding snow to snow. Mu Qing was about to go crazy, scram. In the past few hundred years, it was not that he had never been on the verge of death. But that was because he'd suffered heavy injuries, and dying in the lava was 1,000 times more terrifying than dying from injuries. When he thought about how he was going to transform into a strand of smoke and vanish without a trace like the lifeless necro butterfly, he was utterly unable to accept it. Finally, Mu Qing's hands reached their limit. His fingers loosened slightly, and he could no longer hold on. There was nothing under the knife, he had fallen. A figure fell towards the blazing inferno pond below. However, even though he cried out miserably, after his body fell for a distance, he suddenly stopped in mid-air and hung in mid-air. Mu Qing was still in a state of shock. Half of his scalp was numb, but his instincts were still there. He quickly touched his body. It turned out that a piece of white silk was wrapped around his waist. It was naturally Ruoxie. But for some reason, he felt that Bai Wuxiang would not use the curse to threaten him. Without another word, he rushed forward and saw that the red and white figures were fighting fiercely. After observing for a moment, he judged that it would be difficult for him to rashly join the battle. Ruoxi waved his hand and pulled the Imperial Preceptor over, saying, "Master. Are you all right?" The Imperial Tutor wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and said, "I'm fine." Xiao Yan asked, "Why are you sweating so much if you're fine?" The Imperial Preceptor said, "Isn't it because I was scared by that blood rain Tanhua?" At this time, he heard Feng Xian and Mu Qing cry out in alarm. Xiao Yan raised his head and looked over, only to see Bai Wuxiang's hands slightly drooping. One of his arms had already been injured. He turned his palm over and looked at the blood all over it. He sighed and smiled. "It's been many years since someone could injure me to this degree." Xiao Yan had a bad premonition and said, "Master, is he angry?" The Imperial Preceptor could be said to be the person who understood Bai Wuxiang the most in this world. He said, "No, it's worse than him being angry. He is happy." Pausing, Bai Wuxiang turned towards Hua Cheng and asked with interest, "That scimitar of yours, was it refined from that eye you lost?" Hua Cheng clearly had no interest in answering, but Xiao Yan's heart suddenly jumped. From the first time he saw misfortune, he knew that this scimitar was definitely not ordinary. He also had a 60% guess that it might have been refined from Hua Cheng's lost eye. Bai Wuxiang's tone was so certain. Could it really be so? The Imperial Preceptor's brows slightly furrowed. After a moment, he suddenly said, "I remember." Xiao Yan asked, "Remember what?" The Imperial Preceptor said, "I remember. I heard them talk about something before. A few hundred years ago, a malicious ghost came to Bronze Cauldron Mountain." Mu Qing said, "The number of malicious ghosts that came to Bronze Cauldron Mountain was at least several tens of thousands." The Imperial Preceptor said, "Don't interrupt. That malicious ghost became a ghost for a very short period of time. It was very young, and when it came, it was about to vanish into thin air. But for some reason, it persisted and floated here." For some reason, Xiao Yan's heart was beating wildly. He said, "Vanish into thin air. Why?" The Imperial Preceptor said, "It seemed to be heavily injured, and its soul was almost scattered. Its consciousness wasn't very clear either. But as it floated around, it kept repeating that it wouldn't leave, it wouldn't leave. Maybe it was because it had an unfulfilled wish." In short, that year when Bronze Cauldron Mountain was opened, an accident happened. When Xiao Yan heard it wouldn't leave, his heart inexplicably softened. He then asked, "What accident?" Not only did tens of thousands of ghosts gather in Bronze Cauldron Mountain, but there was also a group of living people who mistakenly entered the forbidden area. "What?" The Imperial Preceptor said, "The Bronze Cauldron was filled with demons and ghosts. Normal people couldn't escape at all, and could only be used as nourishment. But for some reason, that malicious ghost brought along a large group of living people and escaped for many days. In the end, it was surrounded by tens of thousands of ghosts and forced to a dead end. It was about to be devoured along with the living people." Xiao Yan knew that this lonely wandering wild ghost was definitely Hua Cheng. He said, "And then? Is there any way to escape and be saved?" The Imperial Preceptor said, "There is. Refine a blood vessel and kill our way out." Mu Qing still couldn't help but interrupt, "Then the safest sacrifice, isn't it those living people who fell into a desperate situation?" Feng Xian and Mu Qing looked at Hua Cheng, who was completely focused on the fierce battle with Bai Wuxiang. Could it be that he, Xiao Yan, also held his breath? The Imperial Preceptor said, "Yes, he made his move." Feng Xian and Mu Qing's expressions became indescribable. Xiao Yan, however, didn't move, waiting for the Imperial Preceptor to continue. As expected, the Imperial Preceptor said, "He made his move. He suddenly went crazy and dug out one of his eyes." The imperial preceptor said that malicious ghost almost attacked those living people, but for some reason, he didn't move in the end. Instead, he used one of his eyes as the price to refine a blood vessel. But that malicious ghost was originally holding on to his last breath. After digging out his eye, he should have completely fallen apart. But for some reason, he was stimulated by something and became completely awake. I don't know what evil vessel he refined, but it actually survived that battle. Also, there's something strange. Xiao Yan forced himself to calm down. What is it? The imperial preceptor said, it said that after that battle, a heaven's tribulation descended from the heavens and struck Bronze Cauldron Mountain. Do you know what this means? What else was there to say? The heavens tribulation descended, which meant that the heavens felt that someone in Bronze Cauldron Mountain had the qualifications to ascend. Xiao Yan grabbed the imperial preceptor and said, Who? Who ascended? The imperial preceptor said, I only heard it from others. But in the heavenly court, none of the heavenly officials came from Bronze Cauldron Mountain. Either what I heard is completely false, or the person who ascended jumped down and rejected the heavenly court. Mu Qing couldn't accept it at all, ascended as a ghost? Is there really such a thing? And he rejected the ascension and jumped down himself? It can't be him, right? He had just entered Bronze Cauldron Mountain at that time, he hadn't reached the pinnacle yet, right? Jumping down like that, there's no telling if he'll live or die, right? Why did he do it? How could he do it to this extent? Suddenly, Xiao Yan heard Bai Wuxiang sigh, Xianlu, you have a very loyal follower. Before he finished, a face of sorrow and joy suddenly appeared in front of Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan didn't expect Bai Wuxiang to be able to get so close to him in an instant. His image was clearly reflected in the eyes of Bai Wuxiang. Ruoxia's hair stood on end, it wanted to attack, but in the end, it shrank back. But it couldn't be blamed, because Ruoxia had always been very smart. When it judged that its attack was useless, it would give up. Bai Wuxiang seemed to smile, because the sorrow and joy face split even wider. In the next moment, the blade of misfortune swept past his neck. But it was a step too late, Bai Wuxiang had already dodged. He suddenly appeared at the highest point of the skycrossing bridge, raised his hand slightly, and said, Don't be nervous, I'm just taking back my thing. In his hand, there was a long sword that was completely black, like cold jade, with a silver heart piercing through the heart of the sword. Xiao Yan subconsciously touched his back, and sure enough, the maiden heart that he was carrying was gone. The maiden heart was originally Prince Wu Yang's sword. Bai Wuxiang took away the sword that originally belonged to him. 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. The deathly white mask peeled off bit by bit, and finally completely fell off, revealing the face behind the mask. That white robe also turned into a white armor in the burning flames. Finally, Bai Wuxiang took off the mask and became Jun Wu. Everyone held their breath and became vigilant. Chapter 241. Xiao Yan grabbed him. Stunned, she said, San Lang. What's wrong? Hua Cheng was still calm. I'm fine. I just overdid it a bit. Xiao Yan was stunned. Why didn't you tell me earlier? How is this fine? Mana, it's that mana. When Hua Cheng gave Xiao Yan his mana, it always seemed inexhaustible. He smiled as if he didn't feel the slightest burden. But that was his own mana. It wasn't sand washed away by the waves. How could it really be inexhaustible? He couldn't blame Hua Cheng for not telling him earlier. He could only blame himself for not thinking of it earlier. Xiao Yan was regretful and anxious. I'll give it back to you. He held Hua Cheng's face and kissed him. Feng Xian and Mu Qing wanted to come over. When they saw this, they instantly retreated a few meters. He let the two of them do it themselves. The curse had been removed. He desperately transferred all the mana he could to Hua Cheng, wanting him to recover as soon as possible. But, he kissed him for a while and then let go. The red clothes on Hua Cheng's sleeves and the silver bracers were still transparent. They were even translucent. Xiao Yan was stunned for a while. Terrified, she subconsciously cupped Hua Cheng's face and wanted to kiss him, but Hua Cheng reacted quickly. Hua Cheng's eyes were sharp and his hands were fast. He held his face and kissed him. Although I'm happy that brother is so proactive, you don't have to transfer mana to me. However, if brother didn't want to borrow mana and just wanted to kiss me, I wouldn't mind at all. The more the better. You're welcome. Xiao Yan grabbed him tightly. He was about to collapse. What's going on? Hua Cheng said, it's just a little rest. Brother, don't be afraid. Xiao Yan hugged his head. How can I not be afraid? I'm about to go crazy. With Hua Cheng's temperament, if the problem wasn't so serious that he couldn't hide it, why would he let Xiao Yan see him like this? Just how much magic power was there to be able to cause the two shackles to explode? It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was as vast as the sea. How could he not be affected at all? It wasn't easy to clear up all the messy matters. He talked it over with Feng Xian and Mu Qing. The curse that had bound him for more than 800 years had also been released. Those who had always wanted to be honest with Hua Cheng but didn't dare to were all honest now. However, when he turned around with a smile on his face, the flower city that welcomed him had become like this. How could he not be afraid? He was so scared that he was going to go crazy. Feng Xian and Mu Qing sensed that something was amiss. Your Highness. What's wrong? He took a few steps forward, but for some reason, he stopped halfway. He felt that it was not a good idea to approach recklessly. At this moment, Xiao Yan couldn't pay attention to anyone else. He grabbed onto Hua Cheng, his heart about to stop beating. Gladiolus also rubbed his son's bald head and said, in any case, it's enough that I'm wrong. Who didn't make undying vows and promises when they were young and ignorant? They would always talk about love, and forever. However, the longer I stay in this world, the more I understand that something like forever is impossible. It's impossible for me to live forever. It's already good enough to have existed. No one can really do it. I don't believe it. She helplessly said, Feng Xian is a good person. It's just, too much time has passed. Everything is different now. Forget it. Xiao Yan silently listened and didn't say anything. In his heart, however, he said, no. There was a voice in his heart that said, forever exists. There are people who can truly do it. I believe it. In the end, Gladiolus still left with the wrong. Xiao Yan returned to send off the Rain Master who had finished sending off Xian Ji. Then, he returned to Mount Taizong to tell Feng Xian that Gladiolus had left, but he didn't see him. Just as he was looking for him in the crowd, he suddenly heard someone shout, Tai Hua, good timing. Are you free? Help me calculate. Lang Qianqiu couldn't avoid it in time and shouted from afar, don't bring it over. I have something to do. Find someone else. Xiao Yan sighed. In his heart, he thought it would be better if he tried to calculate it himself. Unexpectedly, just as he took a few steps, he heard a voice behind him, "Your Highness. Crown Prince." Xiao Yan turned around and saw Lang Qianqiu standing behind him. He scratched his cheek and said, "Can we talk in private?" Xiao Yan replied, "Sure." And so, he and Lang Qianqiu walked together to the outside of the shabby tent hall. As they walked, Xiao Yan asked, "How's Guzi? Is he all right?" Lang Qianqiu smiled bitterly and said, "I don't know if he's all right or not. This child keeps asking me for his father. He's quite pitiful, so I could only store away a bit of Qing Gui's soul and place it in a lamp. Now, he carries that lamp and runs in and out in front of me every day, asking me how to make the soul in the lamp grow up. I really..." Seeing Lang Qianqiu's gloomy face, Xiao Yan could understand his experience. He really didn't understand why someone like him, whose entire family had been killed by Qi Rong, would still do such a thing. Xiao Yan subconsciously wanted to pat his shoulder, but when he thought about what he had done in Yong'an, he held back and warmly said, "You've worked hard. Then, why did you come looking for me today?" After hesitating for a moment, Lang Qianqiu reached into his bosom and took out an item. Handing it to Xiao Yan, he said, "This." When he saw that item, Xiao Yan's breathing slightly froze. It was a small dark red coral pearl that flowed with brilliance. His voice trembled as he said, "This is..." Lang Qianqiu said, "This coral pearl is a secret treasure left behind by the founding ancestor of Yong'an. Understood. Thank you very much, Lord Lingwen." As a prisoner, Lingwen, who was surrounded by many heavenly officials, chuckled and said, I don't dare. Seeing this, the divine officials who hadn't brought the files over yesterday and the hall was still in a mess today couldn't sit still anymore. They gathered around and said, "Actually, I also have a few stacks here. I forgot to bring them over yesterday. You can take a look, or else." Lingwen, Xiao Yan squatted outside the temporary meeting hall and ate a steamed bun. After he finished eating, he clapped his hands and finally rescued Lingwen from her suffering. "Everyone, let's talk about it later. Let Lingwen take a breather first." In the past, when he spoke, no one would take him seriously. But now, it was different. Several people said, "Your Highness the Crown Prince is right." They didn't dare to say anything more. Lingwen sat on a chair, closed her eyes and held her forehead. She waited until the other heavenly officials had all left, and there weren't many people left in the meeting hall. Only then did she say to Xiao Yan, "Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince, for your Dharma body has been restored. What a good plan. I really didn't expect that now even ghosts are your believers, listening to your orders." Xiao Yan said, "Those aren't my believers, they're my friends from the ghost city. I just asked them for help." Lingwen nodded her head, her expression understanding. After a moment, Xiao Yan said, "Lingwen, I have a question I want to ask you." Lingwen said, "Your Highness the Crown Prince, please ask." Xiao Yan said, "San Lang, I'm talking about the master of Hua City. He wore your embroidered celestial clothing, but it doesn't work on him. Do you know why?" Lingwen said, "So it's this question. I thought Your Highness the Crown Prince already knew." Xiao Yan was startled. "Would you like to hear the details?" Lingwen shook her clothes and sat upright. "Your Highness the Crown Prince, have you heard of the legend of the embroidered celestial clothing?" Xiao Yan said, "I've heard of it." "You personally made it?" Lingwen said, "You can say that. Although I never thought that the resentment condensed on this piece of clothing would turn it into such a monster, it was indeed me who killed Bai Jin in order to speed up the destruction of Shuli country." Xiao Yan listened attentively. Lingwen continued, "This piece of clothing passed through the hands of countless people in the human world. After obtaining it, countless people chose to use it to kill people, harm people, and deceive people. Although this could also dispel its resentment, Bai Jin wasn't this kind of person. He didn't like being used by these people. He was extremely disgusted. Therefore, when he encountered a similar wearer or a specific recipient of the clothing, he wouldn't trigger resentment. Instead, he would be very happy. Xiao Yan asked Mu Qing, why did they leave in such a rush? Mu Qing, do you even need to ask? Xiao Yan, use it. Mu Qing unhappily said, then go ask your good San Lang. As it turned out, when Hua Qing returned, the first person to know was Xiao Yan. The second was the heavenly court, which had yet to warm up to the new immortal capital. Not only was it because the Prime Lantern Banquet that they had worked so hard to organize not long ago had ended up like the Mid-Autumn Festival Lantern Banquet, where Hua Qing had suddenly appeared and destroyed all 3,000 lanterns with a wave of his hand. It was also because from that night onwards, the bell had been ringing crazily, and its announcement reverberated throughout the entire heavenly court, as if reminding them that the nightmare of the immortals and gods had returned. With a nightmare right in front of them, ordinary divine officials naturally didn't dare to approach. However, now that the rumors about Hua Qing and Xiao Yan in the heavenly court had reached a point where they didn't need to add fuel to the fire, they still wanted to build a relationship with Xiao Yan and ask Hua Qing to show some mercy in the future. When Xiao Yan heard this, he recalled Hua Qing's request to report his glorious achievements to the heavenly court for an entire year. He laughed and said, naughty. Mu Qing said, how is this just naughty? You should just let him keep it. It's too outrageous. Now, that bell is making people panic every day. It's impossible to work in the celestial heavens. From time to time, it would even fall and hit people. It wasn't easy to rebuild the new immortal capital. Don't ruin it because of this kind of thing. Xiao Yan said, all right, I'll go talk to him later. By the way, would you like to try it? He pointed at the noodle soup on the table in the courtyard and added, I didn't make it. When Mu Qing heard the first part of the sentence, his expression was cold and filled with rejection. Only when he heard the second part did he return to normal. At this moment, Feng Xian also arrived. He entered the courtyard and just happened to pass by a few young priests who were about to leave. After exchanging greetings, they whispered among themselves, it's General Nan Yang. It's him. So pitiful, his wife and son ran away with someone. The veins on Feng Xian's forehead bulged as he cursed loudly on the spot. Fuck. Are you guys done yet? How many months have you been talking about this? Also. It's ran away. It's not ran away with someone. You motherfucker are just spreading rumors. The few young priests with loose mouths were so frightened that they hurriedly ran away. Mu Qing, who was at the side, folded his hands into his sleeves and said, you might as well not explain. It just sounds more embarrassing. Feng Xian was furious. He grabbed a broom from the side and threw it at Xiao Yan. Mu Qing caught it and chuckled. Old trick. Feng Xian and Mu Qing fought with brooms while sweeping the firecrackers that covered the courtyard. Seeing the others eating and drinking so happily, they also sat down and picked up their bowls. Just then, Heaven's Eye-Opener said, why didn't you guys listen to others? As he said this, he wanted to get up and go to the kitchen to take a look. Shi Xian held him down and said, really, Taoist priest, you're thinking too much. This is Blood Rain Tanhua's territory, so it's normal to have demonic energy. Fine, you're worried, right? I'll go take a look, you sit down and don't be impulsive. He really did get up by himself and walked to the vicinity of the kitchen. Lifting up the curtain, he said, you see, there's nothing strange about it. Xiao Yan said, wait a moment, I also want to take a look. However, when he, Shi Xian, Feng Xian, and Mu Qing stretched their heads out to take a look, they were all shocked. In the kitchen, a tall and strong pig butcher was currently crazily chopping on a chopping board. If it weren't for the pig legs hanging behind him, they would have thought that he was chopping up a human. At the side, there was a huge fire under a huge vat. In the vat, a long-necked male chicken spirit was rubbing himself in full swing. When he saw that someone had seen him from outside, he immediately screamed and covered his chest with both hands. Xiao Lian's head started to hurt. He hurriedly walked in and said in a low voice, "Didn't I say that we can't do this?" The chicken spirit patted his chest and guaranteed, "Uncle, we came here after taking a bath, so we're very clean. Furthermore, this soup base has the effect of prolonging life, so it won't harm people if you don't drink it. It's not a loss. Don't worry and eat it." Shi Qingxian silently put down the curtain. Feng Xian and Mu Qing immediately threw away their bowls and snorted, "You might as well do it." Xiao Yan rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He found it funny and helpless as he said, "They insisted on helping. There's no other way, they're also doing this out of good intentions." At this moment, Heaven's eye-opener seemed to have finally felt that these people were acting suspiciously and walked over. Xiao Yan hurriedly stopped him, "What's the matter?" He was afraid that Heaven's eye-opener would see Pig Butcher and the others and cause trouble again. Unexpectedly, Heaven's eye-opener didn't come for the kitchen, but for him instead. He circled around Xiao Yan a few times and doubtfully said, "Strange." Xiao Yan asked, "What's wrong?" Heaven's eye-opener seemed to be puzzled and said, "That's not right, Xie Daozhang. Why is the ghost energy on your body even more serious than last time?" Xiao Yan lightly coughed. Mu Qing snorted and said, "Hanging out with the Ghost King all day, of course it's getting more and more serious." Heaven's eye-opener said, "That's not right. Even if that's the case, it shouldn't be like this, right?" Feng Xian said, "What do you mean by this and that?" After being puzzled for a long time, Heaven's eye-opener finally said it directly. He said, "The ghost energy on your body, how did it become from the inside out? This is completely coming from your body. I'm afraid you've suffered a great crime. What did you do? How did you get so sick?" Xiao Yan couldn't even cough. His entire face was about to be filled with blood. Feng Xian and Mu Qing didn't understand at first, but when they came back to their senses, they coincidentally looked at Xiao Yan and went silent. Only Shi Qingxian couldn't wrap his head around it and said, "What's wrong?" "So, what's going on? Your Highness Crown Prince, are you really sick? Do you know Blood Rain Tanhua? Didn't he treat you?" No. It's because of him that it's like this." Xiao Yan stammered, "This. Actually. It's not that. If you guys don't want it. I think, it's better, His mind was filled with some messy images, and he randomly said a bunch of meaningless words. Suddenly, his back leaned against a person's chest. An arm wearing a silver wrist guard wrapped around him, and a familiar voice said with a smile, "I think, it's better if you guys go back to your seats, eat your food, and don't worry about anything else. How about it?" In this situation, Xiao Yan really didn't know whether he should feel like he was pardoned or be even more embarrassed. He said, "San Lang." When they saw Hua Qing come out, Feng Xian and Mu Qing's expressions were indescribable. However, Xiao Yan was in front, so they couldn't say anything. Only Shi Qingxian still asked very seriously, "Blood Rain Tanhua, have you checked His Highness Crown Prince's body?" Xiao Yan covered his forehead, hoping that he would stop asking. At this moment, the beggars shouted, "Another bowl. Add more meat. This chicken soup doesn't have any flavor, add more salt." Mu Qing couldn't stand it anymore and said, "Do you guys know that this is a Taoist temple that worships the heavenly officials? Can you be a little more reserved?" The beggars didn't fall for his trick. The last time they joined hands with many heavenly officials to strengthen the human formation, they personally saw a few heavenly officials trembling and running away. They were even worse than them. In addition, They were too familiar with Shi, so they couldn't help but feel that immortals were like this. They didn't seem to be much different from them, and they didn't seem to be so aloof and inviolable. Suddenly, a cry came from the kitchen, "Who is it?" Hearing this, Xiao Yan's heart tightened. He rushed into the kitchen and saw the pig butcher and chicken spirit shouting inside. He hurriedly comforted them, "Calm down. Calm down. What's wrong?" The chicken spirit was so frightened that goosebumps rose all over his body. "Eldest uncle. It's haunted. There's a ghost that ate all the soup we made. I was just poking myself, if I get up again, there won't be a bowl left. It's haunted." The pig butcher spat, "What are you afraid of? Aren't you the same as a ghost?" Xiao Yan was slightly stunned. How could that be? Didn't I just see you guys make more than 50 bowls? Yeah. But when he looked again, sure enough, those 50 bowls were all empty. Even the soup had been drunk clean. Xiao Yan felt strange in his heart. Suddenly, he thought of someone. He turned around and saw Hua Qing leaning against the door. "San Lang, could it be?" Hua Qing calmly said, "Most likely." "Amichum." Xiao Yan said, "He should have come to congratulate us. We should welcome him, but he ate a little too much. Now that all the food has been eaten by him, what should we do?" Hua Qing smiled and said, "Nothing. Add interest." The troubled ghosts of the ghost city accepted their fate and began to cook again. At this time, a clamor came from the main hall and courtyard. It seemed like someone was quarreling with someone. Xiao Yan wanted to go out and mediate, but Hua Qing grabbed his hand and led him out through another door. The two of them walked out of Pu Chi Monastery hand in hand. There were trees blocking the way. It would be easier to walk if they put down their hands and split up. But the two of them were unwilling to let go of each other's hands, so they took many turns and went around. As they went around, Xiao Yan asked, "San Lang, where are we going now?" Hua Qing said, "It's too noisy here. Let them fight, we'll leave first." Xiao Yan looked back as he walked, a little worried. Don't care about them. Pu Chi Monastery was just rebuilt. What if it collapses again? Hua Qing said carelessly, "If it collapses, then it collapses. We'll just build another one. If brother wants it, you can have as many as you want." Ha 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 ha. At night, in the Thousand Lanterns Monastery, Xiao Yan was wearing a thin snow-white undergarment after taking a bath. He leaned against the collapsed jade platform and wrote stroke by stroke. He was writing to Hua Qing and Lin. Hua Qing was leaning beside him. He was also wearing undergarments with his collar slightly open. His hands were bored to death as he played with the red coral bead at the end of his hair. Under the warm light of the lamp, he kept staring at Xiao Yan. After looking for a while, he squinted his eyes and sighed. "Brother, don't do that. Come and rest." Xiao Yan had already suffered enough just now. He was determined not to be fooled again. Hearing this tone made his ears burn. He forced himself to calm down and continued writing. He said seriously, "No. San Lang, today someone said your handwriting is ugly. San Lang, someone said that your handwriting is ugly again today. You have to practice well, or else I won't let anyone know that I taught you." Hua Qing sat up slightly and raised his eyebrows. "Brother, I remember that you clearly said before that you liked my handwriting." Ever since Hua Qing returned, Xiao Yan had been obedient to him for a long period of time. Xiao Yan would do anything he asked for. It was probably because of this that Xiao Yan had spoiled him. He was becoming more and more mischievous. Xiao Yan finished writing and put down his brush. He became even more serious. "Don't play tricks with your mouth. I'm done. Come and practice." Thus, Hua Qing lazily moved behind Xiao Yan and hugged his waist. He bent down slightly and rested his head on Xiao Yan's shoulder. He took out his red coral bead from the end of his hair and put it on the paper. He let it chase Xiao Yan's bead on the paper. They rolled back and forth. He deliberately didn't let Xiao Yan write properly. He was so mischievously and forcefully showing his existence. Xiao Yan remembered that when he opened his eye of insight, he said that his whole body was emitting ghost energy, from head to toe, from inside to outside. That was Hua Chang's aura. He couldn't help but feel his heart soften. He struggled a little and whispered, "Write properly." Hua Chang said, "Okay, I'll listen to you." He picked up his brush and wrote 2 lines of poetry before putting it down. Xiao Yan looked at it and shook his head. He thought for the umpteenth time, it's hopeless. He paused, picked up his brush, and helped him finish the last 2 lines. After he finished writing, Xiao Yan blew on the paper gently and picked it up. The 2 of them looked at the poem they had written together. The ink on the paper formed 4 elegant lines of poetry. Those who have seen the sea are not water, those who have not seen Mount Wu are not clouds. Looking back from among the flowers, half fate is to cultivate the Tao and half fate is to be a monarch. Even misfortune was at the table with his eyes wide open. He couldn't take his eyes off it, as if he was very appreciative of it. Hua Chang smiled and said, "A peerless work of art. Brother, hurry up and sign your name. This word will shock future generations and be passed down through the ages." Xiao Yan had already written Hua Chang's name at the bottom. When he heard him say that, he really couldn't bring himself to add his name. Hua Chang had laughed enough. He pretended to be serious and said, "Brother, are you embarrassed? I'll help you." As he said that, he held Xiao Yan's hand and scribbled a few words. Of course, if it wasn't for the foresight, no one would be able to tell that it was 2 words. It was also impossible to tell that it was Xiao Yan's name. Xiao Yan looked at his own hand writing this kind of thing and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He tilted his head in front of Hua Chang's chest. Suddenly, he felt that these words were a little familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. After a while, he remembered and his eyes lit up. He said, "San Lang, your hand." It's too miserable to eat yuan shao at a stall in the freezing weather. Xiao Yan said, "You can't be like this. Do you still want to do business?" The boss did not speak to him and went to get the bowls. After sitting for a while, Xiao Yan felt that people around him were sizing him up. In other words, they were sizing him up and down with the abnormally large bag beside him. The boss's daughter also sneakily came over. She squatted on the ground and poked at the bag with her finger, seemingly curious about what was inside. Only after her mother called her a few times did she go back. At this time, Xiao Yan still hadn't cultivated the kind of thick skin that would be impervious to swords and spears in the future. He couldn't help but use his foot to kick the large bag under the table, wanting to stuff it somewhere others couldn't see. Unfortunately, this stall was small, and the tables and chairs were also small. There was simply no place to hide things. Xiao Yan could only cough lightly and do his best to ignore the gazes of others. He would get used to it. It wasn't a big deal. Suddenly, he thought of something and hurriedly reached into his chest. His expression suddenly changed as he thought, "This is even worse. Not only is it the Lantern Festival, but I'm also eating yuan shao at a stall in the freezing weather. I don't even have enough money." Originally, he wanted to quickly slip away, but at this time, the boss came over with a large porcelain bowl. He placed it on the table and said, 5 coins. Xiao Yan felt slightly suffocated and said, He coughed a few times and put his fist in front of his mouth. He heard the boss say, "You don't have it." Xiao Yan was about to bite the bullet and get up to leave when he saw a large porcelain bowl on the table in front of him with a bang. He was stunned. He heard the boss say, "Forget it. Seeing how miserable you are, I'll give you a bowl. After you finish eating, I have to close up the stall. Hurry back. Today is the Lantern Festival. It should be a reunion. Xiao Yan sat back down. Although he was thinking that he had nowhere to go after finishing this bowl of yuan shao, he still whispered, "Thank you." The boss put down the bowl and went back. The small pot of leftover yuan shao in front of the stall was carried to a small table by him. The little girl tilted her head and bit her spoon, saying, "When is Big Brother coming back? I want to wait for him to come back before eating." The boss also said, "It's too late. Coming back so late for the Lantern Festival is really outrageous." The woman said, "He's also worked hard. He'll be back soon. Don't scold him later." Meow air, don't be so busy anymore. I'm really sorry for always having you come over to help me. Come over and eat with us. The young girl said, "I'm not busy." Finally, she cleaned up a table and sat down to share the yuan shao with them. The four of them seemed to be waiting for the other family member to come back and reunite. They chatted and laughed. Xiao Yan looked at them and picked up his bowl. He scooped a piece of yuan shao into his mouth and drank a mouthful of sweet soup. However, he still didn't know what it tasted like. Big brother, big brother. Only then did Xiao Yan return to his senses. Hua Cheng was staring at him from the side. His red clothes made Hua Cheng's eyebrows look even more beautiful. The lights added a layer of softness to his pale and lifeless face. Xiao Yan was slightly dazed as he looked at him. "What?" Hua Cheng said, "Big brother, are you tired? Or can't walk anymore?" Xiao Yan casually nodded. Hua Cheng said, "I'm sorry. I was too much last night." After a while, Xiao Yan finally realized what he meant. He hurriedly waved his hands and said, "What are you saying? It's not like that at all. It's completely fine." Hua Cheng raised an eyebrow and said, "Is that so? If it's completely fine like that, then you mean, I wasn't too much yesterday? So I can." Xiao Yan suddenly remembered that they were still on the main street of the ghost city. Startled, he swept his eyes around. Sure enough, at some unknown time, they were surrounded by a large group of grotesquely shaped creatures. Those with long ears pricked up their ears, while those with short ears stretched out their necks. Practically every single one of them had their eyes wide open as they stared at them. They were so shocked that they didn't know what to say. Finally, he said, "Ah, San Lang." Hua Cheng faintly smiled. With his hands behind his back, he said, all right. It's my fault. I won't say any more." Xiao Yan had long since retracted his gaze from the Lantern Festival monster stalls on the side of the street. On both sides of the main street of the ghost city, bright red lanterns were hung. The lanterns were filled with riddles. The ghosts shouted, "Guess lantern riddles. Guess lantern riddles. If you guess correctly, you'll get a prize. You'll get a big prize." Hua Cheng said to Xiao Yan, "Big brother, do you want to try? There's a prize." Xiao Yan walked up and said, "Do you want to try?" The ghosts all became excited and pushed each other. Sure. Eldest uncle is going to guess lantern riddles. Eldest uncle is going to guess lantern riddles. This earth-shattering shouting made it seem as if he was about to perform a godly dance. Xiao Yan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to randomly pick one, a tentacle immediately extended out of nowhere and politely delivered a lantern to him. It said, "You first. You first." For Xiao Yan, it didn't matter which one it was. Thus, he accepted the lantern and glanced at it. The riddle was 4 words, "Find white-haired man." Xiao Yan didn't even think about it and said, "I." Hua Cheng clapped his hands and praised, "Big brother, you're amazing." The ghosts also joined him in thunderous applause, wailing like ghosts and howling like wolves. There was even a pitch-black unknown object doing somersaults in the air and cheering. This was a bit too exaggerated. Xiao Yan blushed with shame and said, "Actually, this is really very simple." That tentacle delivered a second lantern and said, "You first. You first." Xiao Yan accepted the lantern. This time, the riddle was, first day of the spring festival. Similarly, Xiao Yan didn't even think about it. He said, "Husband." Hua Cheng was about to raise his hands to clap again when Xiao Yan said, "No need. This is also very simple." Hua Cheng beamed and said, "Really? But, I truly feel that Big Brother is amazing." Xiao Yan thought to himself, "You flatter me. If you personally answered the riddle on the lantern and I solved it, then that would be amazing." At this time, the tentacle delivered a third lantern and sang, "You first. You first." Xiao Yan took a look and frowned slightly. Everyone around him also said, "Wow. This time it's going to be difficult." Xiao Yan nodded. Sure enough, this time, the riddle couldn't be seen through at a glance. Bashful bowing to express affection. However, it wasn't too difficult. After a short while, Xiao Yan said, "Bashful means the mimosa, taking the part of the grass. Bowing means the head of the word low. Expressing affection means the middle part of the word incline. When these three parts are combined, it's flower." The answer to the riddle is flower. After he finished speaking, he covered his ears. Sure enough, as soon as he announced the riddle, everyone around him began to dance in a frenzy. They boasted and flattered without any bottom line, exaggerating to the extreme and making people numb. Hua Cheng looked at him with a smile and said, "Big Brother, this time, you're really amazing." That tentacle once again raised its lantern and quietly reached over. Xiao Yan also laughed and said, "There's something even more amazing. This time, I can guess the riddle without looking at it. Do you believe me?" Hua Cheng's eyes widened. "Oh, is that so? Big Brother actually has such a unique skill." Xiao Yan took the lantern and said, "Of course. I'm guessing that the riddle this time is city. The city from Hua Cheng, right?" Raising the lantern to look, sure enough, once the spear moves, the south settles. Xiao Yan said, "Once the spear moves, it changes sides. It falls to earth, spear remains. South settles, taking the south of the word fang, it settles to earth and spear as the center, becoming city. This should be the hardest riddle to solve." Unfortunately, Xiao Yan had guessed the pattern first. When these four riddles were connected, what was it? After being seen through, the ghosts no longer dared to cheer. Instead, they started coughing and looked up at the sky. Hua Cheng's gaze slowly swept across them. Chapter 246. Xiao Yan opened his eyes. He found himself lying on the ground. This was an unfamiliar room. He felt very confused. He was clearly cultivating in the Emperor Polarity Temple on Mount Taicang. Why was he here? Xiao Yan was slightly confused as he sat up from the ground. He realized that he was wearing a plain white Taoist robe. It was too plain, as if he was a commoner. The material wasn't good either. It was rather rough. It rubbed against his skin. Xiao Yan frowned. He wanted to get up from the ground. But just as he got up, he felt even more discomfort. His waist was sore. His legs were sore. His abdomen was sore. His neck was sore. Was it because he had been lying on the ground all night? Impossible. He wasn't that weak. What about Feng Xian and Mu Qing? Xiao Yan thought of them. He shouted, "Feng!" Cough, cough. His throat wasn't very comfortable either. He remembered. Last night, Feng Xian and Mu Qing were quarreling over a trivial matter. It was so noisy that he couldn't meditate. He ordered them to go out and answer idioms. Listening to them gritting their teeth and answering more than 200 idioms, he felt sleepy. He rested. Why did he fall into such an inconceivable and confusing situation as soon as he woke up? Xiao Yan held onto the table beside him and stood up. He looked around. This should be an inn. But generally speaking, if he didn't choose to sleep in the open and chose to stay in an inn, he wouldn't stay in this kind of inn that looked like it was a very cheap place. His hands and feet weren't tied, and the door wasn't locked. This meant that he wasn't under house arrest. If someone or something plotted against him, then what was the meaning of throwing him here? The more Xiao Yan thought about it, the stranger he felt. But the strangest thing was the state of his body. He endured the pain in his arms and took off his clothes. He was ready to see if there were any injuries on his body. Unexpectedly, when he took it off, he looked down. His entire face instantly lost all color. From his abdomen to his chest, it was densely covered with ambiguous red marks. His jade-white skin seemed to be covered with large flower petals, blooming bright red. He was so shocked that he rushed to the mirror to take a look. As expected. Not only his heart and abdomen, but also his neck and back. Xiao Yan didn't dare to take off his clothes and continue looking. The matter was very clear. While he was unconscious for some reason, someone had taken his virginity. For the first time in his life, Xiao Yan felt his feet go soft, but he still managed to hold on and stand firmly. A long time ago, he had heard the palace maids who served him talk about some horrible legends outside the palace, such as black-hearted ghosts who specialized in raping and pillaging, drugging girls and then doing bad things. But, Xiao Yan held his head with both hands and muttered, "But, I am a man." His current appearance was truly unsightly. In addition to the kiss marks and the marks left by pinching too hard, there were also the embarrassing bite marks. Xiao Yan covered his face. His head felt feverish and his body was cold. Suddenly, he thought of a very serious matter. Oh no! The Tao that he cultivated was to abstain from obscenity. However, if he did that, wouldn't he be breaking his Tao? Xiao Yan hurriedly tried it. He tried, and sure enough, there was no more strength left. Xiao Yan had always been calm, but in this situation, he was about to collapse. He didn't know why, but when he woke up, he had become like this. Feng Xian and Mu Qing had disappeared, and he didn't know what method had been used to carelessly lose his virginity. He was really about to collapse. After a long time, he still couldn't accept this fact, and his heart was in a mess. However, he couldn't stay like this forever. He could only randomly pick up his clothes and put them on before leaving the inn. Along the way, no one stopped him. Xiao Yan breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't even care about the surrounding buildings, the people's clothes, and the strange accents. However, he probably had a guilty conscience. He always felt that others saw through what happened to him and used strange gazes to size him up, forcing him to walk faster and faster. In the end, he crazily ran into a forest, punched a tree, and directly broke it with a hakacha sound. He angrily said, "Bastard." He wanted to use the most vicious words to curse the person who did this to him, but no matter what he did, he could only curse, "Bastard, bastard, bastard." The fire in his heart couldn't be vented, and it was suffocating. It was also impossible for him to bawl, so he could only keep his head down and beat wildly. Bang 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 bang, he broke dozens of trees in a row. Finally, the earth god cried and shouted as he crawled out and hugged his thigh. "Your Highness the Crown Prince! Your Highness the Crown Prince, don't hit me anymore." Xiao Yan's heart was filled with anger, but this old man had suddenly emerged from the ground and wasn't an ordinary person. Seeing him, Xiao Yan was slightly startled and asked, "Who are you?" That old man wiped his tears and said, "I'm the Earth God here, Your Highness the Crown Prince. This forest is where I live out my retirement. If you keep hitting me, I'm going to have nothing to eat." Xiao Yan thought that since this wasn't someone else's business, he shouldn't recklessly vent his anger. Moreover, no matter how low his position was, he was still a heavenly magistrate. He was also old, so he needed to be respected. Thus, he reluctantly restrained his anger and also stopped hitting. Slowing down his breathing, he said, "Sorry, I was too agitated. How about this? How many trees did I break just now? I'll compensate you." The earth god let go of his thigh and hurriedly said, "No, no, 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 there's no need." Isn't it very normal? Mu Qing then said, "What are you talking about? You must be confused from sleeping. I wasn't here last night." Xiao Yan hugged his head. He wanted to yell and scream, but he forced himself to calm down. After pondering for a moment, he said, "I understand. You guys are the same as me. You must have been haunted by something." Feng Xian and Mu Qing's expressions became more and more strange. Feng Xian said, "I'm confused. Your Highness, why did you call us here?" Mu Qing rolled his eyes and said, "No need to ask. I was wondering why you called someone to find me if there was something wrong and not him. There's probably something wrong with his brain." Xiao Yan couldn't understand what they were talking about at all. He asked, "Who is that?" "State Preceptor." Feng Xian and Mu Qing looked at each other in dismay. After a moment, Mu Qing stepped forward and said, "Your Highness the Crown Prince." Xiao Yan asked, "What?" Mu Qing said, "My memory is a bit fuzzy right now. Tell me, do you remember what we've been doing these past few days?" Xiao Yan asked, "Haven't we been cultivating at the Emperor Extreme Monastery these past few days?" Mu Qing asked, "Where is Hua Cheng?" Hearing this name, Xiao Yan had a very familiar feeling. However, after thinking about it, he really didn't recognize it. Thus, he blankly asked, "Hua Cheng? Who is it?" Mu Qing said, "Okay. I understand." He signaled to the side with his eyes. Then, together with the shocked Feng Xian, they went to the side to discuss. Xiao Yan suddenly felt a bit suspicious. He vigilantly asked, "What do you understand? What are you guys talking about?" After they finished discussing, the two of them turned around. Feng Xian said, "Your Highness, let's go." Xiao Yan became even more suspicious. "Go where?" Mu Qing said, "I'm bringing you to see someone who can solve this situation. Come." Xiao Yan was now 80% vigilant. He retreated again and again. When Mu Qing saw that he seemed to want to run, he said, "Don't go." He stretched out his hand and waved a spiritual light, as if he wanted to bind him. But how could Xiao Yan not run? He broke into a run. When he ran, Feng Xian and Mu Qing had a headache. As the two chased, they roared against the wind. Feng Xian said, "Fuck. I really fuck. What's wrong with him? Even if he forgets things, he can't be this good. He forgot things for 800 years. Mu Qing said, Finally, eating too many random things has spoiled his brain. How is that possible? I'm afraid that he met with an accident when he went out alone. Hurry and find him. His brain right now is only that of a 17-year-old. At this time, Mu Qing didn't forget to make a sarcastic remark. That's right, the naive, silly, spoiled 17-year-old crown prince. Wait. Tell him first. Hurry and tell him first. When something like this happened, of course, he had to tell that person first. Xiao Yan ran for more than 20 li in one breath. When he stopped, he was slightly panting. He felt as if he was still in a huge mysterious net that had yet to break out. What the hell was going on? This was not normal. This was too abnormal. How could he not know Mu Qing's strength? That divine aura would require at least a few hundred years of cultivation before he could cultivate it. How could this be the real Mu Qing? It must be fake. And him. He himself was not normal. As he ran, he realized that his body was as light as a swallow. Although he was originally as light as a swallow, his body seemed to be even faster and more powerful now. Everything was wrong. Calm down, calm down, calm down. Xiao Yan suddenly remembered that just now, Mu Qing seemed to have mentioned a name. He murmured, Flower City. For some reason, this name should be very unfamiliar to him. But when he thought of it, his heart moved slightly, as if a little flower had bloomed in a corner of his heart. Thus, he couldn't help but repeat this name over and over again. Flower City, Flower City, Flower City. This should be a very important person. Perhaps he was the key to this matter. He had to find him first. After making up his mind, Xiao Yan walked towards the direction of the city. Although when he first realized what had happened to his body, Xiao Yan couldn't accept it at all. But in less than an hour, he recovered. Even though his heart and body were still in great pain, he had no time to be upset because he was stuck in a puzzle. The real Fengxin Mu Qing was nowhere to be found. It was enough to show that the mastermind behind the scenes was very powerful. He had to immediately pull himself together and find out the truth. Thus, when he stepped into the city, he had already recovered his usual expression. He randomly picked a tea house and went upstairs to sit by the window. But he wasn't in the mood to drink tea. Xiao Yan picked up the cup on the table and looked at it. The cup had accumulated old tea stains that couldn't be wiped clean. Just looking at it made him tired, so he put it down and ignored it. Inside the tea house, a rather beautiful and graceful girl was playing the pipa and singing to the tune of Orioles. A circle of men, old and young, sat around her, giggling as they looked at her. The girl was singing an ordinary local folk song, something about a young girl going out early in the morning to pick flowers. But after singing for a while, the group of old men said, "Boring, it's not good, change it." "Yes, this one is not good, change it. Change it to mine." The singer was helpless and could only follow their wishes. She changed to a rather erotic and gentle folk song. It was light and slow, and the sound was so soft that it made people blush and their hearts beat faster. The group of onlookers were satisfied and all applauded. Xiao Yan sat by the window on the second floor, but he felt very uncomfortable. Listening carefully to the lyrics, it seemed to be a song about a young couple on their wedding night. It was extremely bold and explicit. Xiao Yan had never heard such obscene lyrics and songs in the imperial city. If it was in the past, even if he heard it, he could just treat it as a flirtatious song because it had nothing to do with him. He would never think about such things in his entire life. But now, it was different. Although he couldn't remember how it happened, he was already a human being. Hearing this kind of song again would change his mind. Moreover, he discovered a very frightening thing: his mind was completely out of his control. The lyrics were a little flirtatious, but his heart was in turmoil. Also, many fragmented images kept popping up in her head. Their hands were tightly intertwined with each other, and the red thread between their fingers was touching each other. She could even hear broken gasps, sobs begging for mercy, and the seductive whispers of a certain man. "What are these? What are these?" Xiao Yan was ashamed and annoyed. He bit his lower lip and clenched his fist. After a long while, he couldn't bear it anymore and finally couldn't help but smash the table. Bang! The guests at the nearby tables stared at him with wide eyes. Xiao Yan woke up and apologized in a low voice. He wished he could block his ears with his hands so that he couldn't hear anything. He thought that if he continued to sing, he would have to leave. Suddenly, the song stopped abruptly, and a scream pulled him out of his reverie. Xiao Yan suddenly raised his head and saw a large group of people surrounding him. It seemed like they were touching him. The singer hugged her pipa and stood up in fright. She wailed, "Gentlemen, let's just listen to the song." "Don't touch him," a few men jeered. "So what if we touch him?" Anyway, it's definitely not just us who touch him. I don't believe that you haven't been touched a few times when you're a prostitute. The singer was so angry that her eyes were red. She said, "What do you mean I'm a prostitute? I'm a prostitute, not a prostitute." The others deliberately didn't listen to her explanation. They said, "Hey." She spoke as if she was a pure and chaste woman. "If you're really that serious, you wouldn't be a prostitute." Exactly. Just now you were singing such a song to seduce people. Now you're saying that you don't want to sell yourself. What a joke. The singer was so angry that she almost fainted. She said with a trembling voice, "It was you guys who made me sing. It was you guys who made me sing. That's why I sang." However, no matter what she said, the group of annoyed listeners always had something to say. "We asked you to sing, so you sang. So obedient. It means that you've long wanted to sing such a song to seduce people." Xiao Yan couldn't listen anymore. He was already angry, and now he was even more furious. A white shadow flashed. Before the group of men could figure out what was going on, they were thrown to the ground. The man in the lead had his butt facing the sky as he loudly cursed, "What kind of toy are you? You dare to provoke us?" Xiao Yan stood in front of the singer, his knuckles cracking. However, he still didn't show any anger on his face. In a deep voice, he said, "Enough is enough. A beautiful woman like a flower, anyone would be moved by a bit. However, if you don't treat her with courtesy, then you're despicable and shameful." Someone shouted, "It was clearly her who sang first. If she sang, then why can't we touch her?" Xiao Yan said word by word, "That's right. Even if she sang, you guys can't touch her." Before he finished speaking, 7 or 8 burly men were thrown down the building by him. Their butts fell to the ground. It was a frightening fall, but in reality, they didn't suffer any serious injuries. However, it was still frightening enough because no one could clearly see how he made his move, so how could they talk about resisting and counterattacking? They hastily fled. Upstairs, Xiao Yan turned his head. That singer very gratefully got up and bowed to him. She said, "Many thanks to this Taoist priest for helping us out." Xiao Yan said, "It was nothing more than a slight effort. Miss, do you still want to stay here?" That singer nodded. Xiao Yan also nodded and said, "Okay. Then you can continue singing." After he finished speaking, he sat back down. Lifting the hem of his clothes, he sat upright and still, guarding this place. When the other men saw that he wasn't leaving and was still staring in this direction, as expected, they didn't dare to go up and disturb him. That singer understood his intentions and became even more grateful. She gently opened her mouth and once again started singing her usual lively local folk song. Xiao Yan poured a cup of tea and was just about to drink it when he lowered his head and saw the old tea stains inside. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he still couldn't overcome himself. Putting down the cup, he sighed. Inadvertently turning his head around, he was stunned. He saw that on the opposite side of the street, there was an even more gorgeous red building and wine shop, and there sat a single person. That person was a tall man dressed in red. Although he wore a black eye patch, adding a bit of wildness to his appearance, it couldn't hide his handsomeness. His clothes were red, and his skin was as white as snow. He held a silver cup in his hand, and the wine cup and his pair of silver wrist guards flickered with spiritual light. As far as the eye could see, it was extremely dazzling. He was currently looking in this direction, facing Xiao Yan from a distance. When he saw Xiao Yan's gaze cast over, he faintly smiled and lightly raised his cup, as if he was saluting him through the air. For some reason, when Xiao Yan and that man's eyes met, it was as if electricity had passed through his entire body. He promptly withdrew his gaze. However, although he pretended not to care, his heart was madly thumping. It was truly strange. That man was indeed elegant and dazzling, possessing a kind of mysterious attraction. However, it wasn't as if he had never seen such an elegant man before. Why did he have such a reaction when he saw that man? After thinking about it, he rejected this idea. This was simply wrong. Because, after carefully thinking about it, he had indeed never seen such an elegant and handsome man before. Thinking up to this point, Xiao Yan thought to himself, this is a rare character. I might as well pay more attention to him. He turned his head to look again. However, with this glance, that man in red had disappeared. He actually disappeared just like that. It was as if a gorgeous maple leaf had leisurely floated down, mischievously flashing past his eyes. It made his eyes light up, and then he had disappeared. It was as if it wasn't real, as if it was just a fleeting dream. Xiao Yan reservedly looked around the gorgeous restaurant for a while, but when he couldn't find any trace of it, he finally gave up. He didn't know if he was a little disappointed, but he softly exhaled. Rubbing the space between his eyebrows, he inwardly said, forget it. Who would have thought that when he turned his head, he would see that at some unknown time, someone had already sat across from him. That person was currently staring at him with one hand supporting his cheek. The two people's gazes met. Xiao Yan was slightly stunned, but that person actually laughed and said, Taoist priest, can you invite me to drink a cup of wine? Chapter 247. He actually sat across from him so casually. Xiao Yan blinked his eyes. After a while, he was sure. This man was really talking to him. He immediately reacted. He couldn't be shocked by this person's aura and fall into a disadvantage. He remained calm and said politely, unfortunately, I quit drinking. This cup. I'm afraid I can't afford it. The man in red laughed. He sat even more casually and said, is that so? I see this Taoist priest's appearance. It seems like there are clouds of worry. You still need to drink to drown your sorrows. Xiao Yan said calmly, then I'm afraid you're mistaken. Although the biggest precept had been broken, he couldn't give up on himself. He didn't care about other small precepts. His face remained indifferent. However, the man didn't show any intention of retreating. Instead, he sat there like a statue. He sat down and said, since Taoist priest isn't willing to invite me, then I'll help myself. Xiao Yan glanced at him and then looked around. Strange. There were empty seats around. Why did he have to sit here and drink? But there was no reason to refuse. Xiao Yan said, please help yourself. Thus, the other party lazily waved his hand. The waiter in the shop had never seen a customer like this. He didn't even dare to breathe loudly. He hurriedly brought over the wine pot and wine cup and wiped the table with all his might, for fear of neglecting this person. Seeing that the man in red was calm and composed as he poured himself a drink, Xiao Yan couldn't help but ask, could it be that you want people to treat you to a drink when you meet for the first time? That man smiled and said, That won't happen. I won't hide it from you, Taoist priest. Most people can't see my face at all. This tone was quite arrogant. However, Xiao Yan didn't dislike it. The two of them sat separately. Xiao Yan kept looking in another direction, appearing to be very calm. After a while, the man spoke first. He rested his chin on one hand and said, what's this Taoist priest's surname? How should I address you? Xiao Yan made up a fake surname without thinking. My surname is Hua. The man raised his eyebrows and said, oh. Taoist priest Hua. Xiao Yan said, how should I address you? The man said, Taoist priest can call me San Lang. Xiao Yan knew that this person wasn't willing to reveal his true identity, so he didn't force him. After thinking about it for a while, he couldn't think of anyone who was ranked third, so he didn't bother to guess. At this time, he suddenly noticed that on one side of the red-clothed man's cheek, a wisp of black hair was tied into a thin braid, with a red coral bead hanging at the end. The bead had a soft luster. Although it was small, it was obvious that it was priceless. However, Xiao Yan had a feeling that he had seen this bead somewhere before. It seemed to be in his bedroom, where pearls, jades, and precious stones were strewn all over the floor. But he wasn't sure. His clothes were gone, his belongings were gone, his sword was gone, his attendants were gone, and his transcendence energy was also gone. In his 17 years of life, he had never encountered such a helpless situation. Xiao Yan shook his head and stopped a passerby. "Where is this place?" The passerby answered. Xiao Yan had never heard of this place, so he asked again, "Then may I ask how far is this place from the imperial city?" "Where is it located in the imperial city?" He didn't say Xianlu imperial city, so the passerby asked again, "Imperial city?" "This place is south of the imperial city, very far from the imperial city." Sure enough. The accent of the people here and the style of the buildings were a bit strange, unlike the areas near the imperial city. He guessed that it must be very far. He didn't know what the purpose of the person who brought him here was. After walking for a while, Xiao Yan encountered a new problem. He was hungry. But just now, he also said that his belongings were gone. The pendant that could prove his identity as the crown prince had also disappeared without a trace. Previously, he wanted to stuff a few gold leaves into the ground, but he didn't take out anything. After sitting in the tea house for a while, he had already spent the few coins he could scrape out from the tea table. Moreover, because he couldn't stand the stains of the aged tea, he didn't drink a single sip of tea. Now, his stomach was still empty. Truly, a single coin stumped a hero. Just as he was about to frown, he suddenly discovered that next to a tile on the ground in front of him, something seemed to have fallen and was sparkling. Xiao Yan went up and crouched down to look. He was surprised. On the ground of this small alley, there were actually a few gold leaves. In addition to the gold leaves, there were also silver leaves and some bits and pieces of money. In the middle of the day, he actually found money on the ground. A meat pie falling from the sky, he really didn't know whether to say that his luck was bad or good. After Xiao Yan picked it up, his first reaction was to wonder if someone had accidentally dropped it. He walked out of the alley and asked the passers-by on the street, "Excuse me, did anyone drop their belongings here?" Most people shook their heads. A loafer came over with a sullen face and said, "I dropped it. I dropped it. I dropped it." Xiao Yan then asked, "How much did you drop?" They all stammered and couldn't answer, so they all ran away amidst the roaring laughter. Xiao Yan was afraid that the owner would come back to look for it, so he stood in place and waited patiently. After waiting for nearly an hour, he still didn't see anyone come to look for it. His stomach was getting more and more hungry. After a long time, he sighed and looked at the belongings in his sleeve. He thought, "How about I borrow some first and return it back 10 times later?" There was no other way. Therefore, after waiting for another incense stick to burn, he went to the side of the street and bought a steamed bun. Xiao Yan had never eaten a steamed bun before. He had never eaten a steamed bun with this kind of coarse flour. It looked big and dull, white and tasteless. However, he didn't want to use too much of the belongings he had picked up. It would be terrible if someone urgently needed it, so he only took the minimum amount. It was the first time in his life that he had obtained such a big steamed bun, so it was a bit novel. He walked through the alley and arrived at a relatively secluded small street. Just as he was about to put the steamed bun into his mouth, a hand suddenly reached out from the side and took the steamed bun away. This method of taking the steamed bun was amazing. Xiao Yan stared blankly. His hand was already empty. He turned his head to look and saw that the person standing to the side was actually that red-clothed man from the restaurant. Xiao Yan was stunned. He didn't expect that this person would actually follow him to this place. What was even more unexpected was that this person would actually steal his steamed bun. After staring blankly for a while, he finally remembered that he wanted to take it back. He jumped up and said, "Give it back." Xiao Yan snatched the steamed bun very quickly, but that man's movements were even faster. In addition, he was also taller than Xiao Yan, so he dodged and said, "Don't eat this." As he said this, he took a bite of the steamed bun, leaving a hole. This time, Xiao Yan couldn't eat it even if he wanted to. He was the noble crown prince, so how could he possibly eat a steamed bun that had already been bitten by someone? His eyes widened as he said, "You." He paused for a moment before angrily saying, "How can you be like this?" When he first saw him, he thought that this person was a rare character and intended to befriend him. He didn't expect that this person was such a boring scoundrel. The two figures, one red and one white, were so fast that it was dazzling. It was impossible to believe that such a wonderful fight was actually just for a steamed bun. Although Xiao Yan vaguely felt that he could be faster, so fast that he could catch up to this San Lang's skills, it seemed that he didn't grasp the essentials, and his hands and feet didn't listen to him. In addition, he was tired, annoyed, and confused all day, so his waist and legs were sore. In his anger, he actually lost his footing and fell to the ground. Immediately, he let out a low cry of pain, and his teeth were exposed. Pain. An unspeakable pain spread from the part of his body that was hard to speak of. This pain was originally there, but because the wound had been carefully treated, and because he tried his best to ignore it, it wasn't obvious. With this fall, his expression immediately changed. San Lang's expression also changed. He immediately leaned over and grabbed Xiao Yan's arm, saying, "Brother." He immediately changed his words, "Are you okay?" Xiao Yan was extremely embarrassed. He wished that he could dig a hole and bury his face in it. He desperately pulled his arm back, saying with a burning face, "Please don't call me that, and don't grab me like that." Sure enough, San Lang let go of his arm, but it was just for show. He grabbed Xiao Yan's shoulder again, saying, "How are you? Does it hurt anywhere?" His tone was full of concern, and it didn't seem to be fake. As the saying goes, one doesn't hit a smiling person. Xiao Yan should have accepted his kindness, but when he thought about where it hurt and why it hurt, he felt ashamed and angry. All the gloominess he had accumulated all day surged up. He slapped away San Lang's hand and rolled to his feet, saying, "I don't hurt anywhere, it doesn't hurt at all." After saying this, he turned around and ran. Who knew that the man behind him would grab his wrist again, and he couldn't break free? Xiao Yan couldn't bear it anymore. He abruptly turned around, his eyes wide open in anger, only to see San Lang staring at him. San Lang softly sighed, "Ai, this Taoist priest, no matter how wrong you are, it's all my fault. Don't be angry with me. How about this, I'll take you out for a drink to apologize to you." He didn't know why, but when Xiao Yan saw this person's face, his heart became restless. He wasn't used to this kind of feeling. He only wanted to quickly escape, saying, "I don't want you to take me out. I never drink. Quickly let go of me." San Lang said, Okay, I won't drink. Then how about I take you out to eat? You're hungry, right?" Xiao Yan was furious. What kind of tone was this person using to talk to him? He was practically coaxing him like he was a child. He had never suffered this kind of humiliation before, so he said, "I also don't want you to take me out to eat. I'm not hungry. Show some respect." What was awkward was that as soon as he finished speaking, a weak protest sound came from his stomach. Xiao Yan's body stiffened, and he became even angrier. His face was red with anger, and he stuttered, You, why are you pestering me? Don't pester me anymore." San Lang stared at him closely, saying, "Taoist priest, don't tell me you still haven't noticed?" Seeing that his expression had suddenly become serious, Xiao Yan asked, "Noticed what?" San Lang said, "There's an evil thing on your body." Xiao Yan stared blankly. Suddenly, his wrist loosened, and the bandage that was wrapped around his wrist slid down like a white snake. It rose up high in front of him, and then immediately pounced towards him. However, before it could pounce, it was caught by the red-clothed man, who said, "Look." That piece of white bandage was like a poisonous snake that had been caught by the red-clothed man. It writhed incessantly, causing one's scalp to feel numb. He was actually hiding such a monster on his body. Xiao Yan finally understood. He blinked and said, "So, you approached me because you discovered this evil thing hidden on my body?" San Lang's expression became even more solemn and serious, saying, This thing is very strange, so I paid a little attention to it. Fortunately, it didn't hurt you." The truth was out. Xiao Yan thought about how he had not been very polite to this young master before, throwing his face and shaking his hand. Now that the truth was out, and it turned out that this young master had approached him with good intentions, he felt very embarrassed. He earnestly bowed and said, "Many thanks, sire. Previously, I misunderstood." Before he could bend his waist, San Lang held him up and said, "Don't mention it, don't mention it. It was just a slight effort." Raising his head, Xiao Yan was slightly confused. He didn't know why, but he always felt that although this red-clothed man looked serious, the corners of his eyes and brows were full of smiles. He guessed that his messy and embarrassing state had been taken in by the other party, so he felt somewhat embarrassed. Speaking of which, it was strange. Among his peers, Xiao Yan was already considered very steady. Who knew that when he saw this man, he would not be able to remain calm, making him feel very uneasy. However, San Lang didn't seem to notice this and said, "Since it's settled, then I'll be leaving. Taoist priest, may we meet again someday." Xiao Yan subconsciously said, "May we meet again someday." San Lang waved his hand, turned around, and left. Xiao Yan couldn't help but follow him a few steps. Maybe it was because he really didn't know where to go, or maybe it was because he was confused. When San Lang turned around, Xiao Yan was startled. Only then did he wake up and hurriedly stop, pretending to look elsewhere. However, it was already too late. A few chuckles came from the other side. Xiao Yan was so embarrassed that his ears turned red. Bracing himself, he looked over. San Lang crossed his arms and laughed, "I think we shouldn't wait until we meet again. I think now is the time. How about it? Taoist priest is now willing to drink with me." It was still the same gorgeous restaurant from before. This red-clothed man he had just met was very generous. The moment he came up, he filled the entire table with the best wine and dishes in the restaurant. Unexpectedly, it was not inferior to the imperial palace's cuisine. Moreover, many of the cooking methods were very novel. Xiao Yan had never seen them before. His stomach rumbled with hunger as he ate. Only then did he realize that San Lang had been staring at him with one hand propping up his cheek. That gaze seemed to be treating him like a dish to be eaten. Xiao Yan once again felt like he was sitting on pins and needles under this kind of gaze. Chapter 248. Xiao Yan's eyes suddenly widened. His face was full of disbelief. San Lang asked, "What's wrong?" How could Xiao Yan say anything? The shame and anger of being deceived and played around with mixed with hot blood rushed to his head. He slammed his palm on the table and said through gritted teeth, "So, it was you." The table couldn't withstand his slap and split into pieces on the spot. Fortunately, there was no one else on the second floor of the wine shop. Otherwise, they would have been scared out of their wits. Xiao Yan didn't have a weapon in his hand. He slammed his palm down again. San Lang was still sitting in his chair. He only tilted his head slightly. That palm slammed into the wall behind him. Rubble rustled down. He didn't move an inch. He crossed his arms and raised his eyes slightly. Taoist priest. What is the meaning of this? Xiao Lian's face burned fiercely. He didn't know how red it was right now. The bones in his other hand cracked. He said angrily, "You, don't pretend anymore. You know very well what you did to me." San Lang raised his eyes a few more inches. He said, "Unfortunately, I really don't know. What did I do to Taoist priest? How did I teach you to be so angry? Can you give me a pointer or two?" This person was actually asking him to speak with an innocent face. What was he supposed to say? How could he say that kind of thing in broad daylight? Xiao Yan had never seen such a person. He was so angry that he trembled from his shoulders to his heart. His face grew redder and redder. He cursed incoherently, "Shut up. You. I'm going to beat you to death, you shameless, lowly, despicable, you." San Lang sighed. "Taoist priest, I didn't expect that my sincerity would receive such a response from you. How am I shameless, lowly, and despicable?" Xiao Yan finally regained some composure. "Don't try to lie to me anymore. The red line on your hand already proves that you are that. Oh." San Lang didn't panic. He raised his hand and said, "You mean this? Is there a problem with this red line?" Xiao Yan felt as if he was stabbed when he saw the red line. "I saw it. At that time, you had this red line on your hand." San Lang asked, "When?" For a moment, Xiao Yan really wanted to beat him to death. Asking a question that you already know the answer to is too despicable. But for some reason, no matter how angry he was, he couldn't move his hands. Moreover, it wasn't because he was restrained by others that he couldn't move. It was because his own body didn't allow him to move. At this moment, a few people ran up the stairs and said, "What are you two doing? How can you recklessly smash it?" Xiao Yan turned around and said, "It's dangerous here. You guys go ahead first." Who would have thought that with this glance, he would be stunned again? Each of them had a red string tied to their hands. Xiao Yan blurted out, "What's up with the red thread on your hands?" Someone said, "Red thread?" It was that steamed bun. I originally planned to return it several times in the future, but no matter what, in the end, I still took it without asking. "I'm sorry." San Lang was all smiles and said, "Dao Zhang, why do you have to be like this? Isn't this normal human nature? Not to mention the fact that I originally intended to invite you to drink with me, didn't I still eat that steamed bun in the end? Don't take such a small matter to heart. Don't you think it's wonderful? Coincidentally, the person who picked up the thing I lost was you, Dao Zhang. This really is fated to meet from 1,000 miles away." Xiao Yan's heart relaxed as he received his forgiveness. He said, "However, San Lang, you also have to be careful. It was dropped so clearly on the road and you actually didn't see it. Next time, don't be so careless." At this time, the cowering shop assistants said, "My two customers, have you two calmed down? If you've calmed down, then come and calculate the price for the broken table." Xiao Yan was speechless. In the past, it wouldn't have been a problem for him to pay any amount, but now, he couldn't even afford a steamed bun. San Lang said, "It's nothing. Just put it on me." Just now, he was clearly the one who made the first move against San Lang, yet San Lang took the initiative to help him pay for the things he broke. Xiao Yan was so moved by his gentleness and consideration that he couldn't speak. His Adam's apple moved as he said, The shop assistants also didn't know what was going on, but even after their shop was smashed, they still cheerfully came over to help them get an even more gorgeous table. The two of them sat down again. Xiao Yan couldn't help but feel guilty and grateful. He only felt that 1,000 words were difficult to express. San Lang then said with concern, Dao Zhang, from what you said just now, it seems there's something you're hiding. What's going on? Dao Zhang, what did someone do to you? How could Xiao Yan say that kind of thing? His face, which had just calmed down, blushed again. He stammered. Nothing, nothing. San Lang said, if you don't mind, could you tell me a little? Who knows, San Lang might be able to help a little. Although he had good intentions, Xiao Yan was being chased by him until he had nowhere to run. He couldn't sit still and said helplessly. It's really nothing. San Lang, can you stop asking? It was hard to say. Since that was the case, San Lang didn't force it. He said, fine. Where were we just now? You want to go see Hua Cheng, right? Xiao Yan gathered his thoughts and said seriously, Does San Lang know how to do it? San Lang said, of course I know. However, these few days, Hua Cheng won't be able to see him. Why? San Lang used his chopsticks to arrange the vegetables on the plate into a big smiling face. He said, I heard that the person he loves is slightly unwell these few days, so he wants to accompany her. Apart from that, he's not free. Xiao Yan thought to himself, sure enough, this Hua Cheng is a man of character and is very sentimental. He admired him even more. He said, I see. Then, how long do we have to wait before we can see him? At most 5 days, at least 3. I suggest, Taoist priest, there's no need to be anxious. Before that, it's better to rest in peace. Xiao Yan was just thinking about how he didn't have a place to stay when he heard San Lang say, if Taoist priest doesn't have a place to stay, why not come to my place and rest for a while? In any case, my house is big and there aren't many people living here. Xiao Yan couldn't bear it anymore and said softly, San Lang, you're really, really good. This was the first time he had used such straightforward words to praise someone. He was a little embarrassed, but other than that, he really couldn't find anything else that suited his mood better. San Lang seemed to enjoy it very much and said with a smile, who asked me to hit it off with you, Taoist priest? Oh, right, there's another question I forgot to ask. Taoist priest, how old are you this year? Xiao Yan said, 17. San Lang said, 17. That's younger than me. Indeed, he looked to be around 20 years old. San Lang said seemingly casually, then in that case, Taoist priest should call me older brother. Xiao Yan was a member of the imperial family and the incomparably respected His Highness the Crown Prince. Originally, he shouldn't have called other people brother. Not many people could bear to do so. However, this San Lang gave Xiao Yan a very good feeling. He had never called other people older brother, so it was very novel. Thus, Xiao Yan smiled and said, so it's big brother San Lang. Xiao Yan didn't know if it was an illusion, but after he called him big brother, San Lang's smile suddenly became a little strange. It was really hard to describe. San Lang's left eye seemed to suddenly burn, so hot that Xiao Yan felt his skin burn. Blinking, he asked, what's wrong? That terrifying heat disappeared in a flash, and San Lang immediately returned to normal. Smiling, he said, it's nothing, I was just too happy. There's no one younger than me in my family, so I've never heard anyone call me that. Xiao Yan said, if San Lang doesn't mind, then, how about I call you that? San Lang's eyes flashed with a smile, but his mouth still declined. Oh, of course I definitely won't mind. That depends on whether Taoist priest mind. Xiao Yan said, I don't mind, of course I don't mind. Big brother San Lang, are we going back to your house now or? San Lang put down his chopsticks and said, then, come with me now. San Lang's residence was an extremely spacious and gorgeous mansion. When Xiao Yan entered, he felt that it wasn't much inferior to some of the palace gardens in Xianlu Imperial Palace. This made him even more certain that this San Lang wasn't an ordinary person. This San Lang really treated him with utmost sincerity. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Why was he sitting there doing nothing? In any case, he couldn't see Hua Cheng for the time being, and he had always wanted to do something for his good brother, San Lang. Why not help him capture that monster? There was another man sitting near Xiao Yan. The person carrying the chest walked over to the man and sat down. Patting the wooden chest, he said, I brought Xiao Yan. Remember to deliver it to the person your family is offering today. Don't doubt me. If these two aren't placed together, they'll be in big trouble. Of course, of course. Of course I know. Xiao Yan couldn't bear it anymore and opened his mouth. Excuse me, those two people simultaneously turned their heads to look at him. Xiao Yan said, forgive this one for being presumptuous. Excuse me, what's inside this chest? That person said, didn't I say it already? The one inside is Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan was puzzled, but, isn't Xiao Yan the crown prince, his royal highness? Those two people seemed to find it funny and said, no one said he wasn't the crown prince. He was originally. Take a look. As they spoke, they opened the chest. Xiao Yan's eyes widened. That wooden chest was actually a small shrine. Inside the shrine was an ash-colored statue of a god. It was a Taoist dressed in white with a bamboo hat on his back. He didn't recognize him. Xiao Yan was completely unable to understand. Are you saying that this statue of God is the crown prince of Xianlu, Xiao Yan? Otherwise? The other people also surrounded him one after another. Half of them were looking at him with curiosity. You, young man, are really strange. You look like a Taoist priest. How can you not even know such a simple thing? Half of them were looking at this statue of God. Wow! This tattered statue of an immortal isn't bad. It's really depressing. That's right, it's so depressing. Just one look and I think it's unlucky. Good, good, good. The uglier it looks now, the better it will look when that person breaks it open. At most, it will be placed together for 8 days before the effect will be seen. Xiao Yan said blankly, tattered immortal. How did it become a tattered immortal? Everyone said, this Taoist priest, you are really strange. Xiao Yan has always been a trash collector. Xiao Yan wasn't a person who got angry easily. At this moment, he was slightly annoyed. Anyone who heard others ridicule him as a trash collector would not be happy. He suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, does everyone have any dissatisfaction with the Xianlu royal family? Even if there is, insulting the crown prince like this is not very appropriate. Everyone looked at each other and laughed. What are you saying? What country's etiquette is this? The Xianlu country was destroyed more than 800 years ago. 2 hours later, Xiao Yan walked on the street, still somewhat muddle-headed. It was too scary. Everything he had just received was too terrifying for him. How could the Xianlu country be destroyed? My imperial father and imperial mother are clearly still alive and well. And how could I be the one to destroy it? I lost the war. I destroyed the country. Xiao Yan was so angry that he trembled. It's you. It's really you. When he thought of how this person had deceived him, and how he had even shed tears of gratitude towards him, and how he had called him older brother over and over again, Xiao Yan couldn't bear it anymore. Striking out with his palm, he said, you liar. This palm struck San Lang squarely in the chest. Xiao Yan wanted to strike again, but he found that he couldn't move. It was his own body that was blocking him. Xiao Yan didn't understand what was going on, but San Lang grabbed his hand. Xiao Yan was startled. Then, word by word, he said, don't touch me. You liar, you lied to me. I will never believe you again. You. However, San Lang said in a low voice, Your Highness, believe me. Xiao Yan angrily said, I don't believe you. However, just like the attack that had been stopped, he couldn't shout out the words, I don't believe, no matter how hard he tried. The concern and pain in this man's eyes were absolutely real. Anyone who saw someone show such an expression to another person would never doubt his sincerity again. As if to separate Xiao Yan from this foreign world that terrified him, San Lang finally pulled him into his embrace. His lips kissed Xiao Yan's hair as he softly said, Don't be afraid, Your Highness. It's already over. Your Highness. You've already endured it. After a long time, Xiao Yan's body finally softened. Now, he cast aside his shame and anger and carefully thought about it. In those fragmented fragments of his dreams, this man's voice had always been extremely gentle and without the slightest bit of coercion. As for himself, although he had indeed begged for mercy and sobbed, he could hear that there wasn't the slightest bit of unwillingness. It was just that he had always been unwilling to look at it, so he hadn't realized it. Xiao Yan finally knew why he couldn't help but want to trust this man the moment he saw him. Perhaps, 800 years later, his relationship with San Lang wasn't simple. He completely gave up resisting his body and allowed himself to follow his heart. Burying his face in San Lang's embrace, he said in a muffled voice, San Lang said, After being silent for a long time, Xiao Yan muttered, Why, did I suddenly forget everything that happened in the past 800 years? San Lang said, It's my fault. The day before yesterday, you suddenly received a wish in the middle of the night and left in a hurry. I didn't have time to help you recover your powers, and I also didn't have time to tell you that if you were bitten by that monster, it would swallow your memories. Xiao Yan said, Then this isn't your fault at all. It's my own carelessness. San Lang said, Your Highness will never be bad. Xiao Yan forced a smile, then gloomily said, Then, San Lang, how could I let Xian Li's country be destroyed? He clearly cherished his people so much and once had the lofty ambition to let Xian Li continue for another 1,000 years. San Lang hugged him even tighter and confidently said, It's not your fault. Xiao Yan muttered, How could I be such a failure? How could I become like this? Who didn't want to do an earth-shattering and spectacular undertaking in the beginning and leave their names in the annals of history? Even if 1 in a million people might not be able to achieve their wishes, Xiao Yan had never doubted that he was that 1 in a million. Perhaps this was the reason why San Lang didn't want him to discover that it was already 800 years in the future. San Lang said, You didn't fail. Xiao Yan shook his head and said, But I don't have any more believers. San Lang said, You do. Xiao Yan felt sad when he thought about it. He said, I'm a rag and bone immortal, a rag and bone collector. No one is my believer, and no one treats me as a god. Who would respect a rag and bone collector immortal? This was completely different from his dreams. However, San Lang said, Didn't I tell you? You have a believer. Xiao Yan raised his head. San Lang smiled at him and said, Your Highness, I said that you would soon see Hua Cheng. Now, you've met him. Xiao Yan raised his head and gazed at his face. With a slightly perplexed expression, he said, San Lang, when did you meet me? Hua Cheng said, A long, long time ago, before you ascended. Xiao Yan slowly blinked his eyes. Hua Cheng then said, Your Highness, perhaps the current you will feel that the you 800 years later is a failure. Perhaps you will be disappointed and unable to accept it, but please believe me, it's not like this. His bright left eye gazed at Xiao Yan. The light in his eyes was as soft as his voice. He said, You saved me. I've always been watching you. There are countless people in this world who are more successful than you, but none of them could save me like you did, and none of them could do what you did. You don't know how much courage you gave me to make me who I am today. In my heart, you will forever be my only God. Xiao Yan said, and you will forever be my most loyal believer. As soon as he finished speaking, he reacted. Just now, he had subconsciously said those words in a daze, as if he had heard such a precious promise somewhere before. Hua Qing smiled, picked up his hand, and kissed the back of it. He said, yes. After a long time, Xiao Yan seemed to have made up his mind about something. He took out the monster's roly-poly toy from his sleeve and said, was this the monster that swallowed my memories? Hua Qing took the monster and said, sure enough, it was your highness who destroyed its new nest. Xiao Yan nodded and said, if I want to recover my memories, I have to start with it, right? In Hua Qing's palm, the roly-poly toy opened its mouth wide. Gidge, I. Xiao Yan reached into Hua Cheng's chest and took out a piece of paper. He read, I am indebted to Brother San Lang for taking care of me. Lian has no way to repay you. I am willing to do my best to help you solve your problems. Brother San Lang, don't worry. Lian will be back soon. Hua Qing raised an eyebrow and didn't say anything. After Xiao Yan finished reading, he imitated him and raised an eyebrow. Brother San Lang, good Gidge. You're really good. Hua Qing laughed and said, whether I'm good or not, doesn't Gidge already know? Xiao Yan's face slightly reddened. He vaguely said, I don't know what you're talking about. In short, you've been too excessive these past 2 days. Reflect on yourself. Hua Qing solemnly said, Gidge, you can't be like this. I've been treating you with courtesy these past 2 days. It's been hard for me to endure it. Xiao Yan said, how are you treating me with courtesy? You clearly had a lot of fun playing with him. When he thought about how he had turned into an innocent, silly, and spoiled 17-year-old fool these past 2 days and how Hua Cheng had played with him over and over again, Xiao Yan remembered the entire process clearly. He simply couldn't look straight at himself. He couldn't help but groan and cover his forehead. Hua Qing said in all seriousness, it's true. Even if Gidge scolds me as a despicable, shameless, and lowly bastard, San Lang will have no regrets. If Gidge is unhappy, you can scold me again. San Lang doesn't matter. Xiao Yan really couldn't listen anymore. He covered his forehead and quietly slipped away. Hua Qing turned to the side and disappeared. He said, Gidge. Don't run. Okay, it's my fault, Gidge. Chapter 250. Hua Qing was sick. Although it was just a small illness, it turned out that the Ghost King could also get sick. This was really amazing. Therefore, when Xiao Yan returned to the Thousand Lantern Temple and went to check Hua Cheng's calligraphy as usual, he was very worried when he saw his slightly red face. After pressing Hua Cheng onto the divine platform. That's right, the two of them rolled around on this spacious divine platform all day long. In any case, there was no statue of a god. Xiao Yan stretched out his hand. He touched his cheeks and forehead and became even more worried. It's so hot. Hua Qing smiled. Of course it's hot when I see brother. If brother touches it again, it'll be even hotter. Xiao Yan was stunned at first. He quickly tried to pretend that his face was red from anger. Even when you're sick, your mouth is still so dishonest. Hua Qing said innocently, did I say anything? I'm very honest. Brother, don't worry. It's just a small matter. It's fine. However, Xiao Yan could tell that his voice was deeper and hoarser than usual. Fatigue could be seen between his brows as he said, then you should rest well. I'll stay here with you for the next few days and wait for you to recover. After he finished speaking, he brought the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone to the side of the divine platform. Hua Qing patted his side and said, Brother, aren't you coming up to the stage to accompany me? Once he went up, he wouldn't be able to rest for the next few days. Xiao Yan tactfully said, "No, San Lang, am too tired." Hua Qing smiled. How could it be? If it was brother, why would San Lang be afraid of working hard? Xiao Yan stopped messing around with him and concentrated on writing his calligraphy. Hua Qing turned around and held his cheek with one hand as he stared at his face. No matter how many times he stared at him, Xiao Yan would always blush from his gaze. He said rather uncomfortably, "San Lang, look at the calligraphy, not me." Hua Qing sighed and said, "Brother, to tell you the truth, I get a headache every time I see this stuff. But since it's written by you, I can't bear to not read it. My illness might be caused by reading too many calligraphy books." Xiao Yan said, "How can there be such an illness?" Hua Qing giggled. "Why don't you look at brother? Brother looks much better than calligraphy. Maybe you'll get better after looking at me a few more times." Xiao Yan felt helpless and amused at the same time. Putting down his brush, he shook his head and said, "Why do you like to talk nonsense more and more now? Alright, I got it. I'll listen to you and stop looking at the thread." "What are you doing then?" Hua Qing said, "Actually, you don't have to do anything. As long as you accompany me like this, I'll be fine in no time." Xiao Yan touched his forehead again. However, even if you want to go, you can't because there is a barrier in front of the two houses. You must have something on me to pass through the barrier. The immortal continued to ask, "What thing?" The Ghost King answered, "One house hides dirty trash. You must use something that I can touch and a lot of it to open it. The other house hides a powerful talisman. You must use something that I can't touch but is very hot to open it." Of course, the immortal didn't listen to him. Although he pretended to be very obedient in front of the Great Ghost King, once the Great Ghost King left, he leaped onto roofs and vaulted over walls to quietly go to the back of the mountain. As expected, he heard terrifying howls and cries for help coming from the house that hid the dirty trash. The immortal suspected that the missing brides were locked here. So, he decided to steal something from the Great Ghost King and open the mysterious house. But what did he want to steal? The Great Ghost King had a head of long black hair. Sometimes it was loose, sometimes it was tied up crookedly. The first idea the immortal came up with was to steal a few strands of his hair every day. He asked, "Excuse me, can we stay in the same house?" His groom answered politely, "Of course. We are husband and wife." Just like that, they stayed in the same room. Although they slept on the same bed, the immortal didn't let the groom take off his clothes. The Great Ghost King also gracefully didn't touch him. However, the immortal soon realized that his groom didn't lose a single hair. No matter when he helped him comb his hair in the morning or when he slept at night, not a single hair could be seen on the pillow, bed, floor or comb. This was going to be a real headache. The immortal took a sword and wanted to secretly cut off a strand of hair while the Great Ghost King was sleeping. But the Great Ghost King was very vigilant. He immediately opened his eyes when he approached. The immortal was caught red-handed, but he was very calm. To make the Great Ghost King not suspect him, he immediately cut off a strand of his hair and gave it to him. The Great Ghost King was very happy after receiving it. Very quickly, the quick-witted immortal thought of another idea. He said to the Great Ghost King, "Excuse me, can I kiss you?" His groom said cheerfully, "Of course. We are husband and wife." So, the immortal took the initiative to hug the ghost groom and kissed him for a long time. Finally, he tasted a little bit of the ghost groom's taste. He quickly closed his mouth and ran to the back of the mountain. But when he arrived, he realized that this still wasn't enough. Because he wanted a lot of things, but he didn't get enough. He still couldn't go in. He could only stick his head into the house, but his body couldn't go in no matter what. The ragged immortal was a little depressed. When he turned around, he suddenly found that there was a person standing behind him. The great ghost king was actually standing there without him knowing. The immortal was shocked. He remembered that the irascible immortal and stingy immortal told him that the great ghost king was very cunning and hated immortals. Now that he had no magic power, could it be that the great ghost king had already seen through his identity and had been lying to him all along? The immortal was angry and sad, so he broke into a run, running faster and faster. Unexpectedly, he didn't run out. It turned out that he ran too fast, and the things that the great ghost king gave him fell down and were blocked by the barrier in front of the house. The great ghost king caught up, hugged the immortal, and finally explained the ins and outs of the matter. It turned out that the great ghost king didn't catch and eat people, he was only waiting here for his destined person. One day, a wedding procession accidentally bumped into him while he was walking in the mountains. The groom in the procession was so scared that he ran away, leaving the crying bride sitting where she was. The great ghost king didn't want to cause trouble, but the bride said that she didn't want to marry that kind of man, so she didn't go back and left alone. Later, he encountered the same thing a few times, so the great ghost king simply waited here while testing the newlyweds. If the groom dared to stand up and protect his bride from the demons and ghosts, he wouldn't make things difficult and let them go back. And if there was a malicious groom who pushed his bride into the demons' mouths to buy time to escape, he would catch and lock her in this house. Because these people had evil intentions, they would often kill each other, and finally turn into white bones. The immortal saw their corpses. Some of their brides had returned home, and some had fled to faraway places with their lovers, roaming the world, or settling down in their own homes. The great ghost king said, "I've waited for you for hundreds of years, big brother, you're finally here." Only then did the two dispel the misunderstanding and hug each other. In order to leave the house, the great ghost king gave the immortal a lot of his things. Unexpectedly, there was a rumble in the sky. It turned out that the heavenly officials had been afraid of the great ghost king for a long time, and they finally seized this opportunity to attack him. The ragged immortal rushed out and gave a round of beating back a circle of heavenly officials. But the whole mountain was destroyed by the heavenly officials, and the great ghost king was pressed under the mountain. The mountain was too high, and the immortal was afraid of crushing the great ghost king, so he desperately used his shoulders to support it. Right at this moment, he suddenly remembered that there was still a mysterious house that hadn't been opened. There was a powerful talisman hidden in this house, and it could definitely topple the mountain, so he rushed into the cave. Once he entered, he was pleasantly surprised to find that the great ghost king was standing there unharmed, and even stronger. The two broke out of the mountain, and together, they beat away the heavenly officials that came to cause trouble. Finally, they sat side by side on the top of the mountain, looking at the clouds and stars that the heavenly officials left behind when they escaped. The immortal asked, "Didn't you say that the house that hid dirty trash needed to be touched on your body, and a lot of things to open it, but the house that hid the talisman needed something that you couldn't touch on your body, but was very hot to open?" The great ghost king said with a smile, "Yes. Didn't Big Brother get that kind of thing long ago?" The immortal knew. That kind of thing was the great ghost king's passionate love for him. And so, the ragged immortal and the great ghost king happily went to the bridal chamber together, and they never separated again. After reading the story, Xiao Yan was still confused, and said, "What is this all about? Isn't this story too overdone?" No, this. What kind of mess is this? Can this even be called a story?" And Hua Cheng had already collapsed on the bed laughing. Xiao Yan was puzzled, this is completely wrong. What is the basis of this story? That matter on Mount Yujun? That matter shouldn't be like this, it's completely twisted. And, is this kind of story really okay for a child to read? It doesn't seem too appropriate. Who wrote this? And what's with these characters that look very familiar, but also a little off? Looking carefully, although the story in this booklet looked innocent at first glance, as if it was for a child to read before bedtime, the inside was very overdone, and this was even more difficult to look straight at than the simple fiery explosion. But when he read to the end, he felt strangely moved, and it made Xiao Yan wonder if there was something wrong with him. Hua Qing said, It's not completely twisted. At least a few things are right. For example, I did call Big Brother, and for example, I did go to Mount Yujun to receive Big Brother's bridal sedan, and for example, on the night of Big Brother's bridal chamber, indeed. Xiao Yan thought that after so many years, he had cultivated a thick face, but who knew that in front of Hua Cheng, his face would often turn pink, and he said, how can you even know such things? And besides that, there's not a single thing that's right. Although he knew that many made-up folktales were worlds apart from the original, and that it wasn't strange for them to become whatever they turned out to be after being processed countless times, seeing it with his own eyes still shocked him to the extreme. That Crown Prince Yushin's statue had already grasped the essentials of how to walk. It was even brandishing its sword in place. Its graceful posture made it seem as if it was standing on top of the upper Yuan sacrificial heaven. Unfortunately, there was no one to admire it. Not long after, Xiao Yan once again encountered a fork in the road. Naturally, he was prepared to ask his own Crown Prince Yushin statue for help, so he walked into the nearest cave. As soon as he entered, he saw a figure sitting on a stone platform. The figure was currently hugging a jar of wine and fiercely gulping it down. Xiao Yan, he immediately went up and snatched the wine away. Don't drink any more. That Crown Prince Yushin statue was also him. However, his appearance was slightly thinner, and his simple white clothes were no longer luxurious. The wine jar was snatched away by Xiao Yan. It wanted to snatch it back, but in its daze, it couldn't snatch it away. It was so angry that it spun around in circles. Suddenly, it hugged Xiao Yan and started sobbing. Xiao Yan was dumbstruck. You don't have to cry, that Crown Prince Yushin statue cried even more fiercely, as if it had endless grievances. It didn't even try to snatch the wine anymore. It just hugged Xiao Yan and refused to let go. Xiao Yan didn't know why he was so clingy when he was drunk. He could only hug it back, gently caressing its back and comforting it. All right, he looked at the wine jar in his hand again. There wasn't any wine in it, so it didn't matter if he returned it. Xiao Yan said, Did you see a red-clothed person? Where did he go? That Crown Prince Yushin statue showed him a path. Xiao Yan returned the wine jar to it and continued walking forward. That Crown Prince Yushin statue stopped crying. It hugged the wine jar and sat on the ground. Xiao Yan turned around to look at it. He sighed and continued walking forward. After a while, he heard creaking sounds as if iron chains were rubbing against each other. He arrived in front of an empty grotto. There was a swing hanging down from the ceiling of the grotto. On the swing sat a Crown Prince Yushin statue. He was in high spirits and was full of youthfulness. He was wearing the Taoist robe of a disciple of the Huangji Temple. He was about 16 or 17 years old. He grabbed the chain of the swing and tried his best to swing it. But because he was sitting on the swing, he couldn't swing it no matter how hard he tried. Thus, he revealed an annoyed expression. Seeing this, Xiao Yan helped him push it a few times. The swing finally flew. Only then did the Crown Prince Yushin statue in Taoist robe become happy. Xiao Yan took the opportunity to ask, Did you see a red-clothed person? Where did he go? That Crown Prince Yushin statue grabbed the swing with one hand and pointed in a direction with the other. Xiao Yan pushed him a few more times and said, Goodbye. But after the swing swung more than 10 times, it slowly stopped. No one pushed it anymore. That Crown Prince Yushin statue sat there in a daze, revealing an annoyed expression again. After walking for a long time, Xiao Yan estimated, we should be there by now, right? At this time, he suddenly heard a suppressed and painful sound. He couldn't help but be stunned. What's that sound? Panting. That sound came from a grotto in front of him. Xiao Yan walked in to take a look. There was a stone platform in the grotto. On the platform, there seemed to be a reclining Crown Prince Yushin statue. A white veil covered the ground from head to toe. The figure under the veil was vague. Sometimes it curled up into a ball, sometimes it tossed and turned, as if someone was suffering and struggling underneath. Xiao Yan was about to pull down the white veil. Suddenly, a hand covered his eyes from behind. A low voice came from behind and sighed, "Brother." Xiao Yan laughed and said gently, "San Lang, do you think I won't know what this is if you don't show it to me?" After a long time, Hua Qing sighed again and said, "Brother, I was wrong." Xiao Yan removed his hand and turned around to ask, "Home of tenderness?" Standing behind him was a tall man dressed in red. Sure enough, it was Hua Qing. Having been caught red-handed, he supported his forehead with one hand and finally admitted, "Yes." No wonder. No wonder Hua Qing was unwilling to let him see it. Xiao Yan said, "You came here tonight to hide this Crown Prince Yushin statue, right?" Hua Qing looked elsewhere and said, "Yes." Xiao Yan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was he that afraid to let him see this Crown Prince Yushin statue? He said, "Why should I hide it? Actually, it's not a big deal." But now, a very thorny problem has appeared. That thorny problem was that after Xiao Yan came, he inadvertently caused all the Crown Prince Yushin statues to move. This originally wasn't a big deal, but for this special Crown Prince Yushin statue, it was very painful. That was because the Crown Prince Yushin statue was the one carved under the veil of tenderness when he was 17 years old in a cave in a barren mountain. The other Crown Prince Yushin statues were either practicing swordplay, drinking wine, swinging on a swing, or doing anything else. Only this statue was very unlucky. It had been poisoned by the deadly flower demon's poison. As a result, after it came back to life, it had to endure the torture of this poison. Xiao Yan couldn't bear to hear the painful gasps coming from under the veil. He then thought of that soul-stirring and engraved night and said, "This is too pitiful. If I leave now, will it turn back into a stone statue? That way, he wouldn't have to suffer this torture." However, Hua Qing said, "I'm afraid not. After all, brother is at your strongest right now." All the Crown Prince Yushin statues in the Cave of 10,000 Gods have been affected by you. Even if you leave, they will continue acting up for a long time. That would be too painful. Xiao Yan said, "Then, is there any other way?" Hua Qing would always have a way. He nodded slightly and said, "Just now, I was dealing with this. Brother, follow me." He led Xiao Yan into another cave. As soon as he entered, Xiao Yan slightly widened his eyes. He saw a male stone statue standing in the middle of the cave. The statue was tall and slender, with handsome features. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, and his right eye was covered with an eye patch. It looked almost identical to the red-clothed man who led the way. It was actually the statue of a ghost king. Xiao Yan said, Hua Qing said, "This is something I hurriedly carved after I realized the situation wasn't right. I haven't moved it for many years, so I'm a bit rusty. Brother, take a look. Does it look like it?" Xiao Yan carefully looked at it for a while and said, "It looks very similar. However." Hua Qing said, "However, how is it?" Xiao Yan smiled and said, "It's not as good looking as you." Hua Qing also smiled. Immediately after, Xiao Yan said, "So, San Lang, the method you mentioned is, Was it to let this Ghost King statue detoxify the Crown Prince Yushin statue? After a moment of silence, Hua Qing restrained his smile and straightened his expression. He stared at Xiao Yan's face and said, yes. Xiao Yan didn't notice the cautious look on his face at first. In his heart, he thought, this method is too, although it was indeed a method to cure the root of the problem and produce immediate results, just thinking about it made him feel that it was extremely preposterous. To put it bluntly, wasn't it just using a Ghost King statue to break the young Crown Prince Yushin statue's body and suppress the poison? He really found it hard to even talk about it. He still didn't know how to respond when Hua Qing suddenly knelt down on one knee in front of him. Xiao Yan was startled and hurriedly pulled him up. He said, San Lang. What are you doing? Hua Qing said in a low voice, Your Highness, I was disrespectful. Xiao Yan couldn't pull him up, so he also knelt down. Puzzled, he asked, Why were you disrespectful? Hua Qing stared at him and took a light breath. In a low voice, he said, Your Highness, please believe me. Today, I had no choice but to use this method. Although I personally carved this Crown Prince Yushin statue, I have never shown the slightest bit of disrespect to Your Highness's Crown Prince Yushin statue. If Your Highness feels that this method is inappropriate, I will find another method. Xiao Yan finally understood why Hua Qing had suddenly become so serious. Ultimately, Hua Qing had always been worried that Xiao Yan would feel that his actions were rude and offensive, and that his actions were strange. He had carved so many statues of Xiao Yan's god in private. Now that he had brought up this method, he was afraid that Xiao Yan would feel that his brain was filled with wild thoughts and that his thoughts were disrespectful. Xiao Yan smiled and sighed. With both hands, he grabbed Hua Qing and finally pulled him up from the ground. He said, Of course I believe you. I know that you have always respected me. However, never showed the slightest bit of disrespect. This was hard to say. After all, if one were to be a bit more strict, ever since Hua Qing had transformed into a butterfly and returned, he would go to the Thousand Lanterns Monastery every few days to defile the Crown Prince Yushin. Xiao Yan coughed lightly and said, I feel that this method isn't bad at all. Very good, very good. However, when he thought about the essence of this method, his face slightly heated up. He felt that these words were a bit too unreserved. Hua Qing, who had received his permission, gradually regained his composure. Xiao Yan placed his hand on the Ghost King statue's shoulder and said, Shall I open the light for this god statue? Hua Qing blinked and slowly smiled. If brother is willing, then I can't ask for more. Xiao Yan nodded. In a flash, the god statue lightly raised its eyebrows. Seeing this, Xiao Yan couldn't help but smile. He retracted his hand and said, This is too similar. He didn't know if they had sensed something, but a few silhouettes slowly walked in from outside the grotto. Unexpectedly, there were several god statues that curiously surrounded them. They seemed to want to take a closer look at this new god statue that was completely different from them. The Ghost King statue also saw them. It blinked its eyes and raised its eyebrows even higher. It was unknown what it was thinking, but it also seemed to be looking for something. Xiao Yan coaxed and chased them away. With great difficulty, he pushed away the group of god statues. Who knew that with the corner of his eye, he would suddenly say, Where's the gentle home? He had already directly used this to refer to that unlucky god statue. At some point, only a white muslin remained on the stone platform. That gentle home statue had actually disappeared without a trace. Xiao Yan cursed in his heart. Hua Qing, who walked in with his hands behind his back, also raised his eyebrows. Xiao Yan said, The cave of 10,000 deities is very big. It shouldn't be able to escape in a short time. Let's hurry and find it. However, Hua Qing said, I'm afraid not. Brother, look. He pointed at the ground. Xiao Yan circled around to take a look. Only then did he discover that there was actually a circular formation on the ground. It was drawn directly on the rock by an extremely powerful finger force. The earth-shrinking formation. Just how much of his spiritual energy did this god statue absorb for it to be able to draw a earth-shrinking formation with its bare hands? He casually picked up a mysterious and elegant green jade bottle and asked, "Oh? What's this?" The person who donated the bottle said, "A peerless aphrodisiac. With just a few drops, it was guaranteed that the poisoned person would immediately fall head over heels for the person who had administered the medicine. And it won't hurt your body." Xiao Yan sternly said, "Many thanks for the suggestion. However, affection came from the heart. How could it be manipulated by drugs? It's better if everyone doesn't use it in the future." The ghost who offered the medicine said in fear and trepidation, "Yes, yes, yes, no need, no need. However, we don't usually use it." "Isn't this why Dao Zhangxia asked what to give?" Xiao Yan smiled and said, "I think that your mayor probably doesn't need this kind of medicine." All the ghosts shouted, "That's right, if the mayor wants someone, does he still need to drug them?" "Really?" 7 or 8 hands and feet pressed the ghost down. Xiao Yan thought to himself, this is really the truth. For example, he didn't need any medicine at all. As soon as he saw Hua Cheng, he would almost fall head over heels for it. He was truly ashamed. In order to not let his shame turn into a red cloud on his face, he hurriedly picked up another box and opened it. "What's inside this?" The ghost who offered the treasure said, "This is a begetting pill." Xiao Yan didn't even need to ask what this pill was for. He immediately closed the box with a "pa" sound and helplessly said, "What the hell is this? Why did they want him to give Hua Cheng such an improper thing?" In short, after a round of random discussion, Xiao Yan knew that he wouldn't be able to get any useful suggestions. He repeatedly told the group of ghosts to secretly prepare for the Ghost King's birthday celebration and give Hua Cheng a surprise. Then, he left to slowly think about it. Perhaps it was because he had been thinking about this matter so much that his distress was written all over his face. On this day, when he was accompanying Hua Cheng to practice calligraphy, he was racking his brains when he suddenly heard a voice from the side. "Gidge." Xiao Yan finally snapped out of his daze and asked, "What?" Hua Cheng was staring at him. He put down his brush and said, "Could it be my misconception? Gidge seems to be worried about something. Can you say it so San Lang can share his worries?" Xiao Yan's heart tightened. He immediately put on a stern face and warned, "Don't put down your brush. Don't be lazy. Pick it up and continue." Hua Cheng laughed and picked up his brush again. He slowly sighed and said, "I've been discovered." Seeing that he had fooled him, Xiao Yan secretly relaxed. Who knew that Hua Cheng would pick up his brush and write 2 lines before absent-mindedly saying, "However, recently, Gidge has indeed been a little abnormal." Xiao Yan's heart tightened again. However, he still pretended to be calm and composed on the surface. "Oh." Abnormal in what way? Hua Cheng carefully looked at him for a while before smiling. "You seem to be especially obedient." Xiao Yan smiled. "Haven't I always been like this?" Xiao Yan really couldn't come up with anything after racking his brains, so he decided to take a risk out of desperation. He first randomly said some irrelevant things before pretending to be absent-minded. "San Lang, let me ask you something." Hua Cheng asked, What is it?" Xiao Yan asked, "Do you feel like you're missing something somewhere?" Hua Cheng asked, "Missing? What is Gidge referring to? Are you missing something?" Xiao Yan replied, "Oh, no. I'm talking about you. I'm just asking." It was a pity that he didn't dare to ask too directly. For example, what do you like? What do you want? In case Hua Qing found out, he could only beat around the bush. However, beating around the bush didn't mean he wouldn't be able to scratch the itch. Hua Qing asked, "Me? Gidge, do you think I'm missing something?" "That's true." Xiao Yan couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Hua Qing asked again, "Gidge, why are you asking me this?" Xiao Yan was afraid that he would notice, so he threw caution to the wind. He raised his hand and forcefully pushed. Hua Qing had never been on guard against him, so he was pushed back against the couch with a dong. His eyes widened, but he didn't seem to mind. With a smile, he asked, "Gidge, what are you doing? You're so passionate, you." Without waiting for him to finish, Xiao Yan braced himself and stopped him from speaking. This time, Hua Qing didn't have the mood to continue interrogating him. He turned his arm around Xiao Yan and flipped him over. He didn't care what was wrong with him anymore, since he couldn't figure it out by himself. Xiao Yan could only ask for help. The first help he thought of was naturally his two capable subordinates from back in the day. The three of them squatted in a hidden and broken temple. After a moment of awkward silence, Feng Xian asked, "Why are you guys looking at me?" The other two were still looking at him. Everything was understood without words. It couldn't be helped. Among the three of them, Feng Xian was the only one who had a wife. Logically speaking, he should know how to win the favor of those close to him. However, Feng Xian's face darkened under their stares. He said, "It's useless for you guys to look at me. I've only given him one thing. It was that golden belt." That was something that Xiao Yan had given him. Mu Qing felt it was inconceivable that he would also be asked this kind of question. Being able to restrain himself from rolling his eyes was already very polite of him. He only wanted to quickly resolve this matter. He said, "That's fine. The belt isn't bad. You might as well give him a golden belt as well." Xiao Yan automatically ignored his sarcasm and said, "I didn't have a single one a long time ago. All of them had been pawned." Mu Qing became even more sarcastic. "You're now so smooth sailing. The streets are filled with your temples and believers. You can just casually ask for something in your dream and you'll still have to worry about not being able to get one?" Xiao Yan said, "That's meaningless. If I have to give someone a birthday gift from a believer, that would be too perfunctory." Mu Qing saw that no matter how sarcastic he was, this person remained unmoved. His tone finally returned to normal. He said, "Why are you so troublesome? Then you should personally make one for him." Xiao Yan hurriedly said, "Good idea. But I don't know how." "You can learn if you don't know how." Xiao Yan said, "Well said. Who do you want to learn from?" Mu Qing impatiently said, "How would I know? You can do as you please." Before he finished speaking, Mu Qing noticed that this time, the other two people's gazes had coincidentally turned towards him. 4 hours later, Xiao Yan's 10 fingers had already been pierced 7 or 8 times. Only by wrapping them in bandages did his hands not become dripping with blood. Moreover, there was an additional strip of unknown meaning and shape on his hands. Mu Qing really couldn't stand it anymore and asked, "What is this?" Xiao Yan sighed. "A belt." Mu Qing said, "I know this is a belt. What I'm asking you is, what is embroidered on this belt? What is the meaning of these two potato-like patterns?" Xiao Yan said, "These aren't potatoes. Can't you see? These are two people." In order to let them see clearly, he even gestured. Two people's faces. "These are the eyes, and the mouth is here." After confirming that these really were two people's heads, Mu Qing said in disbelief, "Why would someone embroider two big heads on a belt? Can this be worn out? Your taste in clothes isn't that bad, so how could you make this kind of thing?" Xiao Yan couldn't do anything about it. In fact, if you asked him to repair a house, dig a well, or build a wall, he would be very good at it. However, he seemed to be innately bad at this kind of work that leaned towards women. Once he was asked to hold a needle and thread or a ladle, the scene would be out of control. He glanced at his hands that were tied up like a dumpling. Although he didn't feel any pain, the progress was slow. He couldn't help but feel helpless and said, "I'll just change it." However, what was done could not be undone. How could he change it? At best, he could only add a layer of flower petals around the two little people's heads, turning them into two clumsy flowers that intimately intertwined with each other. Feng Xian and Mu Qing's expressions became even more tragic. The veins on Mu Qing's forehead slightly popped out. "I've already taught pigs, why are you so clumsy? Why are you always stabbing your own hands?" Feng Xian said, "When have you ever taught pigs? You're really just talking big." Mu Qing unceremoniously said to Xiao Yan, "Forget it. You should just give up." Only this kind of treasure is worthy of the city lord. Their shouting was extremely exaggerated, causing Xiao Yan to not know whether to laugh or cry. The more nervous he became, the more he didn't know whether he should ask Hua Cheng what he thought. Hua Cheng also didn't say a word. However, his eyes were extremely bright and a smile appeared on his lips. He picked up the silver lock and seemed to be about to speak. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a strange change suddenly occurred. Xiao Yan's knees suddenly went soft and he fell to the ground. This was truly unexpected. The originally cheerful group of ghosts watching suddenly cried out in alarm. Hua Cheng's smile instantly disappeared. With sharp eyes and quick hands, he caught Xiao Yan and said, "Gidge? What's wrong?" Xiao Yan's face paled. He shook his head and forced a smile, saying, "Nothing." Before he could finish speaking, his throat choked. "Oh no, it's coming again." That inexplicable pain in his heart came again. This time, the pain was unprecedentedly intense, as if his heart was about to explode. Xiao Yan secretly cried out in alarm. He didn't expect the pain to come so fiercely. Moreover, each time it came, it was fiercer than the last. It just had to happen at this critical moment. He could still be considered calm, but the sharp pain continued. It was as if someone was waving a peachwood wedge and hammering it into his heart. Xiao Yan was in so much pain that it was difficult to breathe. He couldn't even lift his head as cold sweat dripped down his forehead. Hua Cheng's expression completely changed. "Your Highness." He grabbed Xiao Yan's wrist, but he still couldn't find anything. He said, "Your Highness. Where did you go yesterday?" Panicked shouts could be heard from all directions. Xiao Yan opened his mouth, but it was as if something was nailed to his throat. He couldn't even speak. Hua Cheng's arm that was holding him was trembling. Looking at Hua Cheng's handsome face, which was usually calm and composed at all times, stained with frantic anxiety, Xiao Yan's heart felt as if it had been struck by a heavy hammer. Finally, he couldn't hold on any longer and fainted. Before he lost consciousness, his mind was filled with the words, "I'm sorry." Today was Hua Cheng's birthday. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Yan suddenly woke up. Before he could even catch his breath, he blankly stared at the top of the sky. In a daze, he thought to himself, "This is Thousand Lanterns Monastery? How did I fall asleep?" He was still slowly waking up when suddenly, a hand supported him. Hua Cheng's voice was close at hand. "Your Highness." Xiao Yan raised his head. Sure enough, he saw Hua Cheng's face. Between his brows, there was a burning look. Xiao Yan was startled. Just as he was about to open his mouth, a sharp pain came from his heart. This time, he was completely awake. His entire body immediately curled up, his 5 fingers almost digging into the flesh of his chest. The strength was so great that it was as if he wanted to dig out his own heart. When Hua Cheng saw this, he immediately grabbed his wrist and said, "Your Highness." If he hadn't grabbed it quickly, Xiao Yan's chest would have 5 bloody holes. At this moment, a voice sounded from the side. "I think something's wrong. How about you let him go first?" Mu Qing was actually here. Hua Cheng said, "If I let him go, what if he hurts himself?" Feng Xian's voice immediately rang out. "I'll help you hold him down. If we don't quickly figure out what's going on, his pain won't stop." Xiao Yan's body was bent over when he felt another hand grab his wrist. When he heard this, Hua Cheng's movements paused for a moment. Sure enough, he let go of him. Speaking of which, it was strange. When he let go of Xiao Yan, the pain dissipated quite a bit. In any case, Xiao Yan could finally move. When he turned over, he found that Feng Xian and Mu Qing were standing beside the bed. They had probably been called over to help. Meanwhile, Hua Cheng stood not too far away, staring at him without blinking. When he looked, Xiao Yan's pain, which had faded with great difficulty, returned. When Mu Qing saw Xiao Yan's expression change again, he said to Hua Cheng, "Stand further away. He seems to be in pain every time he gets close to you or sees you." When Hua Cheng heard this, his figure stiffened. His expression was extremely frightening and indescribable. However, he still immediately dodged and retreated outside the room. As soon as he disappeared from Xiao Yan's line of sight, the sharp pain in Xiao Yan's chest also abruptly stopped. Xiao Yan was almost driven crazy by the pain. He gasped for breath and said with difficulty, in the end, what's going on?" Mu Qing and Feng Xian still firmly held him down, preventing him from moving around and looking at Hua Cheng. Mu Qing said, "That's up to you. What's going on with you? You must have provoked something." Xiao Yan said, "I've checked. I don't have any evil spirits on me." Mu Qing asked, "Then did you go to any strange places these past few days?" Xiao Yan said, "The only places I've been to these past few days are Bronze Cauldron Mountain and the Imperial Tutor's tomb." Mu Qing frowned and said, "What? Imperial Tutor's tomb? What Imperial Tutor's tomb?" Hua Cheng stood outside the room, but he already understood. He said, "Imperial Tutor Feng Xian's tomb." Xiao Yan said, "That's right. San Lang, you should come in." Hua Cheng's heavy voice came from outside. "Gij can just stay here and recuperate. I'll go take a look." Xiao Yan immediately said, "I'll go too." However, the moment he got up, he immediately lay back down in pain. After Hua Cheng said that sentence, he didn't make another sound. Presumably, he had already left. Xiao Yan tried to get up again, but Mu Qing said, "I think you should stop moving around. You can't even walk." Xiao Yan was pressed down by 2 people and 4 hands, but he was still struggling. He said, "It's not like I haven't felt pain before. I'll get used to it after a while." He couldn't just not see Hua Cheng just because he felt pain. However, Mu Qing said, "You're willing to feel pain, but that San Lang of yours isn't." Xiao Yan stared blankly for a moment. He thought about the expression on Hua Cheng's face before he fainted from the pain, and then thought about the expression on Hua Cheng's face when he realized that he was in pain whenever he got close to Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan's breathing became sluggish, and his heart suddenly felt as if it was being torn apart. His face immediately turned deathly pale. Feng Xian and Mu Qing were both staring at him. Feng Xian asked in astonishment, didn't Blood Rain Tanhua leave? Why is he still in pain? Mu Qing was very sharp and said, were you thinking about him just now? Xiao Yan clenched his teeth and endured for a good while before reluctantly saying, what could it be? I can't even think about it. Mu Qing said, don't think about it. The more he thought about it, the more tormented he felt. Let me pour you a glass of water. Xiao Yan didn't even have the strength to shake his head and say that it was over. Mu Qing got up to pour some water while Xiao Yan closed his eyes and forced himself to calm down. But the calmer he was, the more worried he became. He didn't know what kind of evil creature had found him, but neither of them could find any clues. He really couldn't feel at ease leaving Hua Qing alone. At this time, Mu Qing handed over the teacup. The teacup was white and elegant. Hua Qing had used it the night before. When he thought of this, Xiao Yan's face paled again. He laid on the ground without saying a word. With one look, Mu Qing knew that Xiao Yan couldn't control his own brain again. He couldn't even pass over the teacup in his hand. With a darkened face, he said, why do you always think about him? Do you not want your life anymore? Xiao Yan said. How is this something I can control? If he could say that he didn't want to be alone, then he wouldn't be alone. Then there wouldn't be so many worries and resentments in this world. Mu Qing said, I think we should just knock him unconscious. That way, he won't be able to control his own brain. However, as Xiao Yan's former attendant, Feng Xian would never hit Xiao Yan. Of course, he also wouldn't allow others to hit Xiao Yan in front of him. He immediately said, no. I think you should talk to him more and divert his attention. That way, he won't keep thinking about Blood Rain Tanhua. Mu Qing said, what can I say to him? No matter what I say, can't he think of Blood Rain Tanhua? It's better to just knock him unconscious. Feng Xian said, in any case, we can't hit him. However, he still couldn't help but ask, so in the end, why did His Highness become like this when he saw Blood Rain Tanhua? What's going on with his heart blood? Is he deliberately not letting him have an easy time? Xiao Yan himself was well aware of what was going on. When he heard Feng Xian's question, he hurriedly said, there's no need to delve into this. Feng Xian doubtfully asked, why not delve into this? Otherwise, what if it happens again next time? We still have to find out the truth. Mu Qing snorted, you still can't figure this out? That blood has flowed out of his body for too many years. After he goes back, if he still can't adapt to it, he'll definitely make trouble. If his heart is like still water, without ripples like an ancient well, then it's fine. However, if his heart is restless, his heart will move, and that blood will surge endlessly, making him feel unbearable pain. He'll have to relive the pain of the peach wood piercing his heart again. At that time, Xiao Yan simply didn't dare to look at Hua Cheng's expression. He only felt that he had lost all his face in front of Hua Cheng. Didn't this mean that as long as he saw and thought of Hua Cheng, he couldn't help but feel his heart and spirit go wild? That's why he would roll around in pain. Thinking of this, Xiao Yan's heart started to beat wildly again. Fortunately, right now, no matter how fast his heart beat, it wouldn't hurt anymore. Suddenly, Hua Cheng, who had been silent for a long time, said, Your Highness. Xiao Yan immediately responded, What? Hua Cheng asked, How long did you stay in that tomb? Xiao Yan was startled, I can't remember clearly. In any case, it was a very, very long time, so long that he didn't even want to count. Pain, hunger, blood loss, hallucinations. At first, he didn't move, but later, he couldn't help but regret it. He frantically knocked on the coffin, wanting to break out of it. However, in the end, he still allowed himself to sink into endless darkness. It didn't feel like the pain of 100 swords piercing his heart, as if it would never be born again. But it was a dull pain that seemed to stretch on endlessly. He sighed. Hua Qing immediately asked, "What's wrong, Your Highness? Does it still hurt?" Xiao Yan shook his head. After a long time, he said in a muffled voice, "San Lang, I'm sorry." Hua Qing asked curiously, "Why are you saying sorry to me?" After hesitating for a while, Xiao Yan said, "Today is clearly your birthday. I originally wanted to let you have a good time, but I've been tossing and turning for an entire day, thinking of a way to break the curse." Originally, he planned to endure until the end of his birthday, but he still couldn't hold it in. Xiao Yan said, "Even the birthday gift I gave you was destroyed because you wanted to help me break the curse. Moreover, it was personally crushed by Hua Qing." Xiao Yan thought about it from beginning to end and felt that today was simply not a matter. When Hua Qing saw this, he laughed so hard he almost couldn't breathe. Although ghosts didn't need to breathe. In short, he hugged and kissed Xiao Yan for a while, praising him until Xiao Yan was so ashamed that he pretended to be dead on the bed. The next day, Hua Qing actually wore it and prepared to go out with a normal expression. When Xiao Yan saw this, he almost fainted. He immediately rolled off the bed and threw himself at Hua Qing. After begging for a long time, Hua Qing reluctantly agreed to use the belt in reverse and show the unembroidered side to the public. In this way, Xiao Yan avoided the fate of his craftsmanship being publicly shamed. As for Hua Qing's display that day was too big, it caused everyone to know that Xiao Yan had fainted from the pain on his birthday. This caused everyone to know that Xiao Yan had been infatuated with the blood rain searching for flowers, and that he had hovered between life and death. However, this was a story for another time. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.